Everyone thought Adrian was nothing more than a spoiled, useless prince trapped in a weak and overweight body. But after nearly dying, everything changed. Instead of wasting his days throwing tantrums, he chose to rebuild himself from the ground up. Even with a body that could barely handle mana, Adrian pushed forward, creating a mana heart, training until his muscles tore and swinging his sword until his hands bled. His uncle Vale mocked him at every step and treated him like a hopeless failure, but Adrian refused to back down. When Vale pushed him to the edge, Adrian made a bold bet. Within half a year, he would prove his worth and force his uncle to acknowledge him. From that moment on, his life became nothing but brutal training, endless pain, and non-stop battles. Day after day, he sharpened his body, his swordsmanship, and his will, until the fat, worthless prince people laughed at slowly disappeared. Then the moment of truth finally came. Adrian faced Vale in battle, and his uncle made it clear that he would only use one ring against him. The battle begins. At first, Vale easily dodged Adrian's attacks and waited for him to draw out more power. That was when Adrian activated a martial spirit hymn through his mana heart and was later pushed even further by forcing out part of the dragon-slaying hymn. Even though his body could barely handle it, his aura changed, his power exploded, and his attack became so overwhelming that even Vale started struggling to block it. Vale had promised not to use more than one ring, but Adrian's final attack was so strong that Vale was forced to activate all 4 of his rings just to stop it. Even then, Vale's sword was still cut in half. Adrian was blasted away in the clash, but the important part was that Vale had broken his own condition. That meant Adrian had forced a quad chain knight to go all out, so by the rules of the bet, Vale lost and Adrian won. But the truth is, this wasn't the same guy. The whole shenanigan begins with our MC, who was reincarnated as a freaking sword, which led to him serving under several masters, and he basically made them into heroes. In the course of this, he met a boy whom he would call his comrade. This boy was born in a nameless rural village, and his name was Leonberg. While he was being wielded by Leonberg, they went on several tours together, thus achieving feats no one could ever match. They fought countless battles, which even led them to fighting a giant and terrifying gray dragon. While fighting the dragon, Leonberg is completely overwhelmed, but with the sword by his side, he gets back on his feet to showcase his overwhelming aura. He lets off a sharp smile as he calls the sword his friend, while dashing towards the dragon with a powerful attack. Leonberg leaps toward the dragon and delivers fatal slashes, cutting the dragon down. Thanks to defeating the dragon, Leonberg became the ruler of a kingdom, and thanks to the legend, Leonberg and the sword, Gruhorn, which they created together, were passed down to Leonberg's comrades. Sometime later, Gruhorn is enjoying deep rest when he suddenly feels someone shaking him incessantly. He wakes up to see an annoying fatso grabbing onto him while declaring that he is the new wielder of the sword. Apparently, this arrogant fatso is the prince, and even when the guards try to tell him that no one except the king touches the sword, he doesn't want to hear. Even Gruhorn can't believe that the dude swinging him around is a prince, since he looks like a rejected pig. Gruhorn decides to check the dude's stats and profile with his authority. This is when he finds out that the dude is Adrian Leonberg, who has incredibly bad stats. However, the name Leonberg alone already tells Gruhorn that the dimwit is really his comrade's descendant. Gruhorn is totally baffled at how someone with such terrible stats is the descendant of the great warrior known as the Sword Saint. Adrian starts babbling about how the nobles will have no choice but to bow to him once he is able to wield the great sword. Adrian screams out like a girl, telling Gruhorn to lend him his strength. Gruhorn knows that he obviously can't give his power to a trash like the dude, but the dude won't stop swinging him around while his guards urge him to calm down. They even remind him that it is forbidden to draw a sword within the palace, but this only gets him angry as he chases after the guards, asking them if they want to die. While he is busy swinging the sword around like a fool, he loses balance, and the god of Fatsos ultimately betrays him as he falls on the sword, stupidly impaling himself. The guards and maids freak out as they scream out his name, hoping that a miracle would happen. But the dude is already bleeding out with a big sword lodged in his body. One of the maids rushes off in panic, hoping to call the royal physician to help them. Gruhorn is shocked when he realizes that he is losing his vision, all thanks to the dude's stupidity. Talking about Adrian, he is basically an arrogant pig with no ability and has the greediness of a boar. He is basically a dark cloud hanging above the kingdom, and it doesn't take long before the rumor that he was stabbed spreads through the kingdom. Surprisingly, he still survived the stabbing incident, and after this, the maids were surprised that he didn't really throw tantrums like before. However, the maids assume that he is lying low because he is scared, and they are confident that he is going to go back to his old self in no time. Unknown to them, Adrian actually died, but has been reborn, and Gruhorn is now the one in his body. Sometime later, Adrian is holed up in his room when one of the maids comes to tell him to prepare himself to welcome the king, but Adrian basically tells her that he doesn't care because the king didn't bother to visit him when he was dying. The maid is forced to remind him to mind his words because the scary knights known as the sharp-eared royal knights are nearby. The knight standing behind the maid tells the maid to leave because the king wasn't even expecting anything grand from the dude anyway. Adrian, on the other hand, doesn't recognize who the dude is, and he just stares at him in the weirdest way. This forces the knight to speak, telling Adrian that they still maintain the bond of master and student, so he is not supposed to pretend like he doesn't know him. It basically occurs to him that the knight is Adrian's teacher, and Adrian doesn't even try to make things better, as he simply talks rudely to the guy. Just then, they get the call that the king has arrived, and Adrian watches as a stern-looking man approaches him. Gruhorn, who is now Adrian, had initially believed that Leonberg's bloodline had diluted over the years. But to his surprise, he realizes that this is not the case. The king scolds Adrian, telling him that he hasn't changed even though he had an encounter with death. One of the knights then tells the king that it appears that Adrian's memory is not intact. They gobble up this fact, and they waste no time in deciding to summon the royal physician. The royal physician soon shows up to check Adrian, and after his checks, he reveals that he can't find anything weird in Adrian's system. However, he reveals that there is a possibility that it is a temporary condition caused by mental shock. The king can't believe that Adrian suffered brain damage that caused him memory loss, and he talks about how convenient the whole thing is because if Adrian had lost his memory, that means everything he has done up until that point doesn't exist. The king is ultimately pissed that Adrian won't be haunted by the bad things he's done in the past. The king continues lashing out until Adrian's master urges the king to calm down, and this is when Adrian realizes that he is screwed. He figures out that instead of being treated like a prince, he is going to end up being treated like a freaking animal. He wonders what his old self has been doing all this time. Adrian is still thinking about how messed up his life is when he is grabbed and hugged tightly by the queen, his mother. She comforts him, telling him that his memory will soon be restored. At the same time, she lets him know that it doesn't matter if he doesn't remember his trivial past. The woman is so happy that her son finally woke up, and she even rubs his cheeks, calling him the most handsome boy on the planet. She talks about how broken she would have been if Adrian had not woken up from the accident. Little does she know that her real son is actually dead, and the new Adrian is just a sword living in his body. After she is done comforting him the best way she can, she leaves, telling Adrian that she will come visit him later. After the woman is gone, our guy is left to think about the whole incident, and he can't believe that he ended up killing one of the descendants he was supposed to look after, even though it was purely accidental. Since it has turned out like this, Adrian figures out that he just has to live out the dude's life the best way that he can. Since he was reincarnated as a sword that was left to clean up after his wielder's mess, he believes that he can get things right with a fat body and no talent. He is completely motivated by how much he has done in the past and how easy it is going to be for him to get things right with Adrian's body. He figures out that the first thing on his list is to forge a mana heart, and he takes in a deep breath before gathering up mana to his heart. However, he is shocked when he realizes that the mana actually vanished, as if the body can't accept it. He refuses to accept the reality of this and decides to try the method again. He continues with this over and over again until he is totally exhausted. He crashes to the ground in pain and frustration, wondering what sort of body he has gotten himself into. Adrian groans in pain because he could have easily fixed a trash body like this, given that he was in his old body just by forcing mana into it. He's in the middle of his crash-out session when a maid shows up, telling him that the queen sent him a restorative medicine. The maid tells Adrian that it might taste bitter, but assures him that it is for his own good. The maid says all this, while trembling because she doesn't know if Adrian would just grab the bowl and throw it at her, just like he did the last time. Unknown to her, Adrian is actually interested in the bowl's content because he has realized that it actually contains mana. Without hesitation, Adrian grabs the bowl and consumes every last drop of the liquid in it, shocking the maid. Adrian then tells the maid that she can leave, and she offers her greetings before turning around to leave. Adrian then decides to try creating a mana heart again, and to his surprise, the tea actually did something nice. However, what he was able to gather is relatively small, and it can even scatter after just a day. Before the maid walks far, Adrian calls her back, asking her if she has more of the tea she just brought. Some days after this, Adrian was able to finally create a mana heart after several trials. Without hesitation, he pushes the mana into his heart, while subtly boasting about how many times he has done this in the past. Suddenly, he starts to feel intense pain, as if his insides are corroding and his chest is being blown apart by a bomb. He falls to his knees with the realization that creating a mana heart is actually painful. However, he can't afford to pass out because if he does, he is going to suffer from mana backflow. With pain coursing through his body, Adrian tries his best to remain focused. He does his best to grab the clump of mana that is trying to run wild while slowly pushing the mana into the right path. With a precise method, he is able to spread the mana into his heart, and in the end, he is successful with it. He is proud of himself because he is able to make a mana heart that is for him and him alone. While he is busy celebrating this, a status window suddenly appears in front, telling him that he has successfully created a mana heart. Adrian is blown away by this because it appears to be identical to the status messages he usually sends to his masters when he was a sword. He wonders why this is appearing for him at that moment in time. Suddenly, he sees a message telling him that the connection is being restored to the origin. To his dismay, the messages that follow are actually really bad because he is informed that the connection is extremely unstable and most authorities are unavailable. His authority, called the Judgment, is available for limited use only, and with this, he can verify the potential of his opponents at a lower or similar level to himself. In addition to this, the Third Eye Authority is available for limited use, and with this, he can see better. Furthermore, the Third Ear Authority is available for limited use, and with this, he can hear better. Adrian confirms this when he realizes that he can actually see more clearly than before, and surprisingly, he can hear what the maids, who are outside, are discussing. Before he can hear everything they are talking about, the system informs him that the mana has been completely depleted, ultimately terminating his access to his authorities. It finally dawns on him what the system meant by extremely limited, because all of the amazing senses that he possessed as a sword have vanished. However, due to the fact that he can squeeze out a bit of mana, he can still eavesdrop on sounds outside the door while seeing things a bit clearly. Even though things seem bad at the moment, he knows that he will get back to his prime once he expands his mana pool. Suddenly, it dawns on him that he is actually hungry, and he immediately demands food. The maids assure him that food will be brought in without delay. Adrian then figures out that the most important thing on his list is to adapt to his body first. Later on, his mother visits him with a smile on her face as she is happy with the fact that Adrian finished all the medicine she sent to him. She believes that her son now finally knows how to treasure his own body. Apparently, his mother is with a stern-looking man and she asks him if he recognizes who the man is. Adrian replies that he doesn't, and the man concludes that he has truly lost his memory. Surprisingly, it turns out that the dude is the queen's brother, and Adrian is able to figure this out when the queen addresses him as her brother while urging him to help his nephew. The man tells the queen that she is supposed to be happy that her son lost his memory because there was nothing memorable in it in the first place. Without a doubt, Adrian can already figure out that the fella doesn't like him. The man then reveals that the best he can do is to remove a bit of the flab on his body. He adds that there should be no big expectations because he can't do more than this. Adrian can see the dude staring into his soul, and he knows that he is screwed. Before Adrian knows it, he gets dragged to the training arena, where the man tells him that everything he does from that moment on must come from him. He must receive permission to even drink or breathe, while letting him know that any expectation to be treated like a prince should be thrown in the trash. His uncle tells him to try his best because he might just change his mind to teach him a shred of their family's secret swordsmanship. Adrian cannot believe what he has been reduced to, and with all determination, he walks to his uncle, suggesting that they made a bet. He tells his uncle that within half a year, he is going to make him acknowledge him. Adrian tells his uncle that if he fails to do this, he is going to do whatever he says. However, if he succeeds, his uncle must grant him a wish. The man agrees to this because he sees Adrian as no more than a means of entertainment. Moments later, Adrian realizes that he might have acted all tough and all, but his body is a weapon fashioned against him. He decides that the way forward is to use mana while focusing on burning the fat all over his body. He is in the middle of this when his uncle suddenly grabs him, and with a worried face, he asks him if he created a mana heart. Adrian boastfully tells his uncle that he was able to do it a little while ago, while asking the man if he is already regretting his decision to make a bet with him. However, things start to look grim when his uncle's voice sounds really worrying and annoying as he asks Adrian what he thinks he is doing by creating a mana heart. He proceeds to ask him where he learned the method to forge a mana heart because what he did is totally wrong. Adrian remains confused until his uncle finally reveals that creating a mana heart is a crude technique that only low-level mercenaries learn, and this sends a cold chill down his body. Adrian doesn't understand what the man means by this, and he asks him what gibberish he is saying. Instead of wasting his time telling him, he decides to show him, and he urges him to watch closely. His uncle then creates a mana around his hand, and to his surprise, it is shaped like a ring. His uncle explains that mana chains have the property of shattering the sword energy of a mana heart, and he shows him by smashing the mana in his hand. He then adds that it is easier and more stable than a mana heart. Furthermore, he reveals that the Eli family, who stubbornly stuck to mana heart, fell into complete ruin 100 years ago. Thanks to how inefficient it is, no one actually uses mana heart anymore. Adrian then sits down to read a book on mana chain theory. Basically, mages use circles, while knights weave chains to gather mana. Furthermore, a knight stage is divided by the number of woven chains. There is a single chain, a double chain, a triple chain, a quad chain, and lastly, a pentachain. After he is done reading the book, Adrian has no choice but to admit that it is not all nonsense, and just then, he notices that the name of the founder, Ernest Altringen, actually sounds familiar. Suddenly, he remembers that in the distant past, his comrade had met Ernest. Ernest claimed to be a sword saint, and he came to challenge Leonberg to see who was more worthy. Adrian remembers that Ernest was using strange arts that cannot be called swordsmanship nor magic. However, he doesn't even remember what happened to Ernest again. The next morning, Adrian returns to training, and his uncle asks him if he now understands his situation after reading the book. His uncle tells him that he has made a foolish mistake, but Adrian disagrees, saying he doesn't think he has made a mistake. His uncle asks him if he has not grasped the severity of the situation, or if he is just too stubborn to admit it. Adrian then tells the man that not all mana hearts are the same, while asking his uncle if he has ever heard of the phrase difference in class. His uncle believes that he is living in a delusion, just like some mercenaries who believe that they are heroes from centuries ago. His uncle tells him that they all ended up being trash because they couldn't even surpass 2 rings. Since Adrian is claiming to be different, the man urges him to defeat a double-chain knight, and he is going to become his guardian, just like his mother wished. Adrian taunts his uncle, asking him if it is a good thing to have him as his guardian because he is not entirely sure of that. This gets to the uncle so well that he asks Adrian if he just questioned his qualifications as a guardian. The man loses his cool while unleashing his aura, revealing that he is a count of the kingdom and commander of the Northern Army. He continues glazing himself by revealing that he is the master of the Black Lancers. While he is busy letting his aura run rampant, the guards are trembling, unable to even move from where they are. His aura dominance soon gets so overwhelming that it overshadows the entire training arena, as he mentions that he is a man who has woven 4 rings, a quad-chain knight. He then uses the maximum aura moment to reveal his name as Vale Balorhard. He tells Adrian that a great man like himself is someone who would stand behind him, and after he is done glazing himself, he asks Adrian if he is sufficient for the qualification. Vale finally pulls back his aura, and the guards draw their swords on him, telling him to stand down. Vale smiles, and instead of being intimidated by everything he just witnessed, Adrian smiles back at him, telling him not to go back on his word later. Not long after this, Adrian is totally beaten to the ground, and since he can no longer move his fat body, Vale suggests that they continue the next day. Adrian manages to get up with the realization that he almost died. On his way to his chambers, he remembers how Vale dunked on him, telling him that it is going to be a miracle if he survives against a single chain, not to mention a double-chain knight. Upon entering his room, he meets the royal physician, who reveals that he has been waiting for him. Adrian demands to know why the dude is there, and he reveals that the queen was the one who ordered him to cast healing magic on Adrian. The physician is about to do his thing when Adrian screams out, rejecting whatever he is planning to do. He pushes him out of the room, telling him to get lost because he is just about to make all of his day's effort go to waste. Later on, Adrian is doing his thing when his brother enters the room. Adrian looks absolutely confused, and his personal guard, Carl, remembers that Adrian has no memory of his family members. He then moves closer to tell him that the dude in front is the third prince. The third prince walks up to Adrian, telling him that he heard about his accident, but it is a shame that he actually looks better. Adrian ignores his insults, asking him why he is there in the first place. The third prince is raging deep down because Adrian still has the guts to speak proudly. The third prince then reveals that he heard something interesting, and this is the fact that Adrian made a bet with Vale, which is about dueling a double-chain knight. With a smile on his face, the third prince asks Adrian what he thinks of choosing him as his opponent. When Adrian hears the offer and challenge, he is left wondering why all of Leonberg's descendants turned out to be weird fools. Carl then tells Adrian that the third prince, Gillian, has been renowned for his talent in swordsmanship since childhood. Adrian doesn't want to believe this, but Carl lets him know that Gillian wove 2 rings together at the age of 14, so he is pretty quick. Just then, the maid shows up, telling Adrian that a bunch of letters just arrived for him. Adrian wonders why he is getting a ton of letters from people who didn't even give a damn about him before. His thoughts are shut off when he finally reads the contents of the letters to see that they are all requests to duel with him, because it is nothing but a legal chance to beat the hell out of Adrian. Adrian smiles evilly because it simply means he is an easy target. He then tells the maid to write down the names of everyone who sent a letter, because he has plans for all of them. Later on, Adrian heads to the training ground, and Vale throws him his wooden sword. Vale tells him to pick up the sword because he needs to know at least a shred of swordsmanship for the bet to stand, and he doesn't want him to make up excuses that he lost because he wasn't taught the basics. Adrian bends down to pick up the sword while wondering why the dude couldn't just hand him the sword instead of throwing it on the floor. Just as he is about to get back up, he screams in pain because of his muscle, leaving Vale surprised. He walks up to Adrian, asking him if he didn't receive healing magic. Adrian tells Vale that he must know why he didn't because he is also a knight. He mentions that healing magic only restores muscles to their original state and doesn't help them grow. Vale is blown away by this, but doesn't have a choice but to admit that he is right. Vale walks back while telling Adrian that he doesn't have any intention of talking about what is right or not. Vale tells Adrian to watch him closely on what he is about to show him because he is not going to repeat himself. He mentions that it is the technique that the kingdom's knights learn to build their foundation, which is basically the kingdom's training sword. Vale swings his sword elegantly, displaying a magnificent sword style that scatters everything around him like a wave, leaving Adrian mesmerized. Adrian is forced to ask him again if what he just showed is the sword style knights learn to build their foundation. Vale believes that Adrian is not really impressed, and he tells him that the sword style might lack sharpness because it is a training sword, but it is actually faithful to the basics, which is why it is the right fit for learning the sword. Vale is still explaining everything about the sword style when Adrian bursts out laughing because the sword style Vale just displayed is the Dragon Slayer style, which is the great swordsmanship that beheaded the Mad Dragon. Adrian cannot believe that this important sword style is now being treated like some trivial training sword technique. Vale continues by saying the sword style might not be enough, but Adrian cuts in, telling him that he is not going to learn any other swordsmanship because the one he just showed him is enough. Adrian then starts to swing his sword, following the Dragon Slayer's technique, while thinking about everything that has happened so far. He figures out that the Dragon Slayer technique is now considered weak because they have abandoned the mana heart, which has left them with no way to imbue will into the sword. Adrian continues swinging, but Vale suddenly stops him, telling him that power doesn't go into his sword just because he tenses his arms, while reminding him of what he showed him. Vale hits him in the belly and legs, telling him that he has to channel his strength properly to wield the sword. Adrian subtly agrees to Vale's teachings because even though his current self is just a weak body that is clumsy at mimicking even a fake Dragon Slayer style, he is eager to prove that the Dragon Slayer style isn't some old junk to be thrown away like useless worn-out shoes. With this determination, Adrian starts to train like crazy, and before he knows it, a month has gone by. He is in the middle of a training session when the status window reveals that he has successfully changed his body constitution via arduous training. The system tells him that his trait, morbid obesity, has changed to general obesity, which is much better. Thanks to this, metabolism becomes active due to a change in constitution, and the system also informs him that he has become accustomed to using his body through repetitive training. He has also lost the trait of clumsiness, which helps him to effectively increase the effect of exercise significantly. The system also tells him that his constitution has changed after consistently accumulating mana. Adrian smiles because everything the status window is showing is actually right. He is now able to swing his sword more naturally than a month ago, and he is stronger than he was before. Adrian is completely immersed in his training until he hears Vale screaming at him to stop. However, he is so concentrated on it that Vale cuts down his sword, forcing him to stop. Surprisingly, Adrian has been training in the rain in bad conditions, without a care. His hands are bleeding from holding the sword for so long, and the blood drips onto the floor into the rainwater. However, this is not the only shocking thing that happened because the training dummy that Adrian is using has been destroyed. There is literally lightning moving around the dummy, and Vale scolds him for training on a day that has the worst weather. He lets him know that he would have been dead if he were using a metal sword instead of a wooden one. Adrian stays mute as he stares at his blistered fingers before getting messages from the status window, telling him that he has completely awakened from a state of extreme concentration. However, his body still remembers the extreme sensation from this, and thanks to this, a new trait, hyperfocus, has been created. Adrian smiles when it dawns on him that he could have been struck by lightning and died. Exhausted from training so hard, he passes out, but Vale catches him before he hits the ground. Soon afterward, Adrian wakes up and he realizes that he must have passed out because he doesn't know the body's limit. When he was a sword, he had accomplished everything possible, from being a nameless war hero to the founder of the kingdom. He was able to lead wars to victory, while elevating the level of body and soul to guide the path of heroes. However, he was just an existence that was nothing but a third party, which is why he swung the sword until he collapsed. He was simply intoxicated by the sensation of making all the sweat, effort, and fruits of labor entirely on his own. He figures out that if he continues this way, the body will break down in no time, which means he has to find a way to balance the mind and body. Since it's been over a month since he formed a mana heart and has gathered quite some amount of mana during these times, he believes that he should be able to move to the next stage soon. Adrian takes a deep breath to gather mana, and the status window lets him know that through his consistent effort, he has been able to upgrade his body to the extent that it can withstand a little more mana. Adrian has expanded his mana heart, which leads to his body's constitution being changed. Blue aura surrounds his body, making him feel like he is all that, and he lets off a satisfying smile while declaring that it is done. He then grabs a sword to see the level he has gotten to, and the status window informs him that he has reached the rank of sword learner, which means he can now use the most basic level of aura. Adrian pulls the sword to his face to stare at himself because he can now proudly handle the basics. When he returns to the training grounds, Vale tells him that there are rumors that are spreading within the kingdom. Adrian asks him what the rumors are all about, and Vale reveals that it is about his bet. Vale suggests that the whole thing is getting on his nerves, and he urges him to find a duel opponent quickly. Adrian had totally forgotten about this, but with Vale reminding him, he lets him know that he has already decided on who his opponent is going to be. He then adds that it is going to be really tough to face a double chain opponent in his current stage, so it will be nice if he can duel with some single chain guys first. Vale lets him know that he is free to do what he wants, and Adrian turns to Carl asking him if he has prepared what he asked for. Carl assures him that he has just as he requested. He brings out the list of those who sent duel requests to him, and since Adrian is aiming to have a practice duel with them, he tells him that most of them have a grudge against him. Carl is worried that they might use the opportunity to harm him under the guise of a duel. Adrian assures Carl that he is aware of this, which is why he is going to appoint Vale as the referee. Adrian tells him that he is not asking for anything too big, but he only wants him to stop anyone from dying during the duel. Some days later, the first dude who received the duel notice arrives at the palace gate. The dude is Taylor Tailhem, and he is the second son of an ordinary baron family. Some years ago, Adrian had made fun of Taylor's father and his brother. He mocked them for wearing regular clothes to a royal banquet, and Taylor has held a grudge since then. Thanks to this, the family's honor was soiled, and his father and brother became the laughingstock of the nobles, even to this day. Taylor is determined to make Adrian pay for what he did back then. Upon arriving at the training grounds, Taylor offers his greetings to the prince while introducing himself to Adrian. Adrian teases the dude, asking him why he is so formal for a normal practice match. He even asks Carl if Taylor is a knight because he looks really weak. This only makes Taylor even angrier because he just confirmed that Adrian is just as the rumors said. Taylor's anger is so great that it starts to radiate out of his inner self, forcing Vale to step in, telling him to retract his spirit because the match has not even started yet. Taylor is totally blown away because he is standing in front of a legendary man. His face turns red while offering his greetings, and Adrian teases them, saying anyone who doesn't know would have thought Vale is the prince. Vale claps back, telling him that he should have behaved better in the past. Adrian has no choice but to shut up because everyone knows how to bring up the past whenever he tries to say anything. Once they are done with the formalities, Vale starts the match, and Taylor wastes no time gathering mana to his body. He smiles evilly at Adrian, telling him to be careful, and he leaps toward him. Adrian doesn't feel any intent of threat from the dude as he teases him that everything he is doing is just useless. Taylor manages to land his strike, but Adrian easily blocks it. Taylor is shocked when he realizes that Adrian is making use of a mana heart. Adrian repels his attack, pushing him backwards, and Taylor is shocked that a mana heart was able to block a mana chain. Adrian dives into his best ability of pissing people off by asking Carl if Taylor is really a knight because he looks really weak. Adrian adds that Taylor's attack only felt a bit tingly, and Taylor is shocked to hear this. Surprisingly, they hear Adrian's sword make a sound, and everyone standing in the area is shocked to hear this. Vale is the first to confirm that what he just heard is a sword resonance, and even Taylor doesn't want to admit the truth, staring him in the face. He angrily dashes toward Adrian, swinging his sword at him ferociously, but Adrian blocks every one of his attacks. After swinging so hard, Taylor is forced to back off for a bit. On the other hand, Adrian has been able to figure out one or two things from his recent encounter with Taylor. Adrian then points his sword at Taylor, urging him to cool his head a bit. Adrian closes his eyes to enter full focus mode so he can awaken the dormant will to slay dragons. Thanks to this, Adrian is able to access the sword's recent activity, and his blue aura immediately bursts into a red one. Adrian has just tapped into a power that is solely kept to slay dragons by merging the energy flowing from the Dragon Slayer's heart with the dragon-slaying sword. His aura rips through the roof, shocking Taylor because he can't believe what he is watching. Seeing this, Vale knows how dangerous the situation has become, and he screams at Adrian, telling him to stop as he dashes toward Taylor with an overwhelming bloodlust. Before the match, Adrian had told Vale to stop him if he looked like he was about to kill his opponent. Remembering the favor that Adrian asked, Vale realizes that he has no choice but to step in at this point, and just as the sword is about to reach Taylor, Vale speeds into the frame and kicks Adrian backward. Adrian is sent into the wall and he passes for a minute. The guards immediately hold their swords to Vale's neck, asking him what he has done. They let him know that he can actually be charged with regicide depending on the severity of the situation. Just then, Adrian comes back to life, telling the soldiers to stand down, revealing that he was the one who told Vale to stop him. However, he doesn't remember telling Vale to knock him out. After saying this, he passes out again, and when he wakes up, he is already in his chambers. He immediately checks his mana heart to see if it is still intact, and he is thankful that it is. He realizes that Vale's power is different from that of a single chain warrior. However, he is thankful that there were no side effects whatsoever. He is celebrating his win when he hears Vale show up beside him, asking him what he is smiling about. Adrian is shocked to see his uncle out of nowhere, and the man asks him what he has gone ahead and done. He demands to know who taught him the sword style that he used, and Adrian replies that he was only being faithful to the essence of the sword. Vale is not entirely convinced because he believes that Adrian doesn't have the right to even mention the essence of the sword when he has never seen real combat. Vale is surprised that Adrian's supposed essence is killing intent, and he lets him know that it is immoral and uncomfortable. However, he admits that it is something that cannot be avoided, and Adrian is shocked that his uncle is not lecturing him about some self-righteous nonsense. Vale then replies that he is a soldier, not a knight, which means he is someone who walks the path of victory rather than the path of righteousness. However, he lets him know that his sword is going too far because his killing intent is too much. He is going to fail to distinguish friend from foe. Adrian finally understands why his uncle is making a fuss about the whole thing because he is trying to get him to fix it. Vale then tells him that he is going to continue watching him to see if he is going to be consumed by his inner demon or not. 3 days later, the practice duels finally ended, and Adrian commended Taylor for his work over the past 3 days. Taylor had no choice but to block a sword with uncontrolled killing intent for 3 days straight. There is no doubt that Taylor has been through hell during these past days, and Adrian knows that Taylor would be feeling really bad because he didn't even get to touch him throughout the whole 3 days. Taylor tries to hide his resentment, but Adrian tells the maid to bring the box he had already prepared beforehand so he can give it to Taylor. Taylor is confused as he asks Adrian what the box contains. Adrian tells Taylor that he heard about how he did some terrible things to him in the past, and even though the box might not make up for it, he still wants him to take the box to his father, Baron Taleham. Apparently, what is inside the box is just gold and a letter, and after handing over the box to Taylor, Adrian wishes him a safe trip back home. Taylor is flabbergasted, and he has no choice but to thank Adrian for the kind gesture. Even though Adrian believes that he has no obligation to clean up the mess that his old self made, he still thinks it is right to pay someone if they have worked hard. Thanks to this, his duel became a hot topic in the kingdom, and people were expecting terrible news from the duel, but to their surprise, none of those who went for the duel had bad things to say about Adrian. In fact, they start to praise Adrian, leaving Adrian's haters to conclude that the royal family has silenced Adrian's duel opponents. When Adrian later hears the new rumor going around, he is ultimately frustrated, leaving him to conclude that the nobles are jobless and have nothing to do with their time. Adrian then decides to tweak things, and after giving his next opponent the gift box, he tells him to spread the news of the day's duel results. He says this assertively, leaving the dude to answer in a terrified way. The dude agrees to do this, and Adrian believes that this will make the rumors die. However, it turns out that he is so wrong because the next rumor he heard is that he is threatening his opponents to fabricate the duel results. Tired of trying to prove himself, Adrian decides to forego everything and just train to his heart's content. His next opponent gets so badly beaten without mercy. After some intense training sessions, he asks Carl how many opponents he has left, and Carl reveals that there is just one more, and he will be coming on that day. Adrian mentions that apprentice knights are no longer doing the deed for him, but Carl lets him know that the last opponent is a knight who has properly learned the sword. He reveals that this person is not even satisfied with merely pushing their family's sword arts and decides to join the knighthood to train, and their name is Arwen Kurgayan. Moments later, Arwen shows up, and it turns out that she is a lady, and she is known by several titles, especially the one who is considered to have broken the hearts of men. The guards are mesmerized by her beauty, leaving them to wonder why someone like that would come to the practice. At the same time, the workers can't wait to have a laugh after Adrian is disgraced by Arwen. When talking about the kingdom's Iron Lion Knights, they are renowned as one of the kingdom's top orders in both fame and skill. Arwen is known as the Probation Knight, and she is a promising talent whose official membership has already been confirmed. Even Adrian is forced to ask Carl why someone as talented as Arwen would take her time to come and duel with him. Carl lets him know that there was once a misunderstanding between him and Arwen in the past, but Adrian knows it is obviously not a normal misunderstanding. He then turns to one of the maids, telling her to tell him what he did to Arwen. The maid reveals that he made inappropriate remarks toward her, and Adrian freaks out when he hears this. At a banquet, Adrian had approached Arwen, suggesting that she become his maid because she looked really beautiful. He even went as far as to wrap his arm around her neck, but she pushed his hand away. Arwen gently tells him that the knights are not his private property, but this only pisses Adrian off, and he ends up calling her an ugly thing. Now, in the present day, the new Adrian can't believe that his old self would really call someone who is as beautiful as Arwen an ugly thing. Arwen offers her greetings to the prince, telling him that he hasn't changed a bit, but Adrian disagrees, saying he has changed a whole lot. Not long after this, Vale arrives at the training grounds, and Arwen introduces herself to the Count. Vale then tells Arwen to be careful because Adrian's sword is quite vicious. Adrian cannot believe that Vale just sold him out when he is supposed to be a neutral party in the whole situation. Without wasting too much time, Vale declares the match open. Arwen goes down on one knee as she prepares to launch her attack. Adrian is totally interested in seeing the skill of the Iron Lion's prospect, and in no time, Arwen dashes toward him. Adrian is impressed by her decent movement, and when he tries to block her attack, he suffers a mana backflow, causing him to cough up blood. However, he is still able to repel Arwen's sword, which results in a fierce battle between the two. Arwen stays on top as she completely overwhelms Adrian's strength. Adrian soon realizes that he has no chance with his current level because he is getting dragged around. After coming to this conclusion, Adrian immediately activates the Dragon Slayer's heart, and the whole aura around him immediately changes, so that even Arwen notices this. Her next attack is easily blocked by Adrian, which did not happen so easily in the past. Arwen is forced to leap backwards to reassess the situation. Adrian commends her, saying she is completely different from the bunch of idiots that he has been fighting. Adrian then decides to use the Judgment Authority on her, and he is impressed by how high her potential is. This also proves to Adrian that he has a chance because he can only see an opponent's stats with this authority if they are on the same level as him, or weaker than him. With this in mind, Adrian concludes that the real fight has just begun. The two end up going at each other till evening with no winner. They look totally exhausted, but they are still ready to fight each other. Vale is forced to come in, telling them to stop and continue the next day. Adrian boasts about how he was able to finish the match, and Arwen also says the same. Adrian immediately suggests that they continue, and Arwen agrees, but Vale won't allow it. He tells them that it is already too late, and both of them should get themselves treated. The physicians then get to work, using their magic to heal the two of the bruises they sustained during the fight, while the two stare at each other with side eyes. As they walk away, they both declare their determination not to lose to each other. By the third day, there hasn't been any clear winner between the two, leaving the guards and spectators totally surprised. They realize that Arwen's skills might be impressive, but Adrian is actually standing toe-to-toe with her. They all hope that everything is settled that very day, and just as they are about to start the fight, Adrian tells Arwen that he has something to tell her. Arwen lets him know that if he is trying to apologize, it would be better if he swallowed it because he is not going to accept an apology. Adrian figures out that she is trying to reclaim her wounded pride with her own power, which is actually an admirable thought. Adrian tells her that he is not trying to apologize and mentions that, since they are both fighting fiercely, he believes that there should be a prize. Adrian suggests that the loser grants one wish for the winner, no matter how ridiculous it sounds. The guards are shocked to hear this, and they quickly call Adrian's attention to what he is about to do, telling him that it is not right for a member of the royal family to say things like this. However, Adrian urges them to stay out of his business, while wondering why there are so many spectators in the first place. Adrian asks Arwen what she thinks, and she reveals that she is just a mere apprentice who is also a member of the knights loyal to the royal family. She is not one to commit such a disrespect, but she lets Adrian know that she is willing to go by his words, since he is the one who is permitting it. She says this with all determination as her aura oozes out of her body, and Adrian commends her, saying that is exactly what he wants. Arwen dashes toward Adrian, telling him not to go back on his words later, and before they know it, they are already crossing swords again. However, this time around, Adrian shocks Arwen by revealing some crazy moves that she hasn't seen since the fight started. She realizes that Adrian wasn't that fast, leaving her to wonder if Adrian has been hiding his true strength. The two continue swinging at each other, and before Arwen knows it, she starts getting pushed back. Suddenly, Adrian dashes toward him with an overwhelming attack that Arwen tries to block, but Adrian simply runs through her, cutting her sword in half. Arwen falls to her knees, leaving the spectators totally shocked. Even Arwen is left in shock, and while she is still trying to understand the situation, Adrian walks up to her, telling her that he won the bet. And following their agreement, he boldly tells Arwen that he wants her, leaving her in a state of shock. When Carl witnessed what had just happened, he remembered that before he was assigned to Adrian, he was expecting a total brat, but it wasn't actually like that. The first day he met Adrian, he might have been arrogant, but he didn't throw violent tantrums as the rumor said. In fact, Adrian was training every single day like he had nothing else to do. In fact, Carl was totally blown away when Adrian trained in the rain without any care in the world. Carl witnessed the prince almost get electrocuted, and he immediately had the feeling that Adrian was going to be a great man. However, now in the present, he can't believe what he just heard Adrian say to Arwen about wanting her. Even the other guards are disgusted while Carl wonders if he had misjudged the prince. With a stern face, Arwen asks Adrian if this is what he really wants, and Adrian says yes. Adrian then continues by saying Arwen is currently an apprentice knight who can't even defeat a fat, useless prince. Adrian then twists everything around, saying that what he wants is her future and potential. Adrian mentions that he wants a knight who will follow him, not a knight like Carl who guards him through royal decree. Basically, what Adrian wants is a knight that belongs to him and him alone. Adrian has no choice but to make this move since he has seen Arwen's incredible potential and he is not about to miss out on her. Adrian then spells it out loudly, asking Arwen to become his knight, leaving a complete shock on her face. Arwen is totally blown away by this, and she starts to narrate how no one treated her like a knight when she was younger. Thanks to this, she was forced to work twice as hard as everyone else. But even after defeating every one of her colleagues, who are apprentices like her, while showing results, she could not become a knight. Now that Adrian is saying he wants her potential and future as a knight, she is left stunned, while wondering if Adrian is actually sincere with what he said. Arwen then tells Adrian to promise her one thing, and this is the fact that he is going to treat her as a knight, not a woman. She assures him that if he can do this, she is going to do as he wishes. Adrian stares into her eyes before promising her this, and Arwen goes down on her knees to pledge her loyalty to the prince. She assures Adrian that she is going to dedicate her sword and the rest of her life to Adrian, and Vale is speechless during the whole thing. Adrian then places his sword on her shoulders, and in that moment, he knights her up. Later on, when the other nobles heard what Arwen did, they were all left in shock because they couldn't believe that Arwen actually swore loyalty to an annoying brat. The nobles had tried to help Arwen, but she refused their help, leaving them to believe that there was something deeper going on between her and Adrian. They even believe that Adrian is using the oath as a cover to secretly take Arwen as his mistress. In no time, Adrian hears about the rumors again, and he holds his head in frustration, asking if he is truly a villain. At this point, he believes that he is the leader of the scums on the planet. Seeing how worried Adrian is, Carl decides to talk to him about what he said on the day of the final duel, about wanting a knight who guards him without a royal decree. Adrian hasn't forgotten this, and he asks Carl if the truth upsets him, while asking him if he won't leave at that moment if a royal decree comes in, telling him to. Adrian then teases him, telling him that he can take the oath later, and Carl wastes no time expressing his interest. He asks Adrian if he would accept his oath, but Adrian says no, revealing that there is no joy in raising him. Carl chuckles nervously, believing that Adrian is just joking, but deep down, Adrian is dead serious. Later on, Adrian gets a royal decree, telling him that he has been released from probation. Adrian is shocked that his probation was lifted so early when the king acted like he was going to throw him in a dungeon, not to be seen again. Adrian speaks out loudly, saying he doesn't really know what the king is thinking by doing this, and Carl asks him if he's not happy that his probation is over. Adrian replies that he really doesn't care because even if he leaves the palace, he has nowhere else to go, and he has no one to meet since he doesn't know anyone. Just then, a maid shows up, telling Adrian that an invitation just arrived for him, and when he checks it out, he realizes that it is a social club for special young lords. The maid tells Adrian that he is part of this club, and Adrian asks her if the place is weird. She replies that for a woman like herself, the young lords are always having fun with them. Adrian immediately figures out that it is a gathering for booze and having fun with women. Adrian then declares that he has no reason to go because he is busy with training. Just then, he realizes that he got an invitation from a supposed friend, Bernardo, who is from the Eli family. The moment Adrian sees the name Eli, he remembers that he has heard it somewhere before. He then remembers Vale talking about the Eli family going into ruins because they stuck to creating mana hearts. Seeing this, Adrian changes his mind, telling the maid that it appears that he is going to go, and the maid assures him that she is going to get everything prepared. Deep down, Adrian can only pray that the family has not totally fallen from grace yet. Before he knew it, 4 months had passed since he possessed the Trash Prince's body. And thanks to his severe training and consistency, he has been able to finally lose weight, and the stylist making his outfits is left stunned at how magnificent the dude is. Adrian admits that he has lost some weight, but the stylist lets him know that he is currently half his previous body measurement. Adrian then tells the dude to start working on the outfit he is going to wear to the palace banquet, and he happily accepts this gracious offer. Suddenly, he tells him to halt on the proposed plan because it is certain that his measurement is going to change again before then. A few days after his probation is lifted, Adrian is on his way to the social club for special young lords that he was invited to. Adrian is already bored in the carriage as he thinks of how exhausting it is to be a prince. Just then, he turns to his maid, who has always been by his side. He notices a scar on her body and he asks her about it. She subtly replies that it is a result of her incompetence, which means Adrian was the one who inflicted the injury on her. Adrian is extremely pissed off when he hears this because the more he digs into his old body's past, the more horrific things that he finds. It then dawns on Adrian that he has been seeing the girl for months but doesn't even know her name. Adrian asks her what her name is and she replies that her name is Adelia Byron. Adrian hears the name and remembers that he knows Byron from somewhere. Apparently in the past, when cities or kingdoms did not even exist, humans were among the weakest races on the planet as they were easily robbed and killed. There came individuals who put an end to this suffering. This led to a great war, and in the end, it was thanks to this set of individuals that humans finally rose to become the dominant species on the continent. There were 5 of them, and people granted them the epithet of the 5 electors. One of those 5 heroes is a really talented woman who wielded Gruhorn back then, and she faced off against giants like it was nothing. She was also the one who beheaded the king of the giants to end the long era of exploitation. This woman was called the Iron-Blooded Sword Marquis, and her name is Agnes Byron. Just remembering Agnes, Adrian's head almost explodes from the amount of curse words that she uses on the battlefield. However, he is more interested in the fact that Adelia is a descendant of Agnes, but is now a regular maid. Moments later, Carl informs him that they have arrived at their destination, and as he steps out, he tells Adelia that they are going to talk properly later. Bernardo then welcomes the prince, bowing to him and asking him if he has been doing great. Bernardo talks about how happy he is that Adrian is safe and sound, but Adrian is not entirely pleased that a punk like Bernardo is a descendant of the Eli family. Bernardo continues yapping until he notices Adrian smiling in the weirdest way. He asks him what the problem is, and Adrian replies that he is just glad that he came because it appears that the whole situation is going to be entertaining. He taps Bernardo on the shoulder before walking away, leaving Bernardo really worried and confused. When the nobles finally settle in the building, they waste no time drinking and talking about how they treated women. However, Bernardo knows that something is totally off because Adrian would have already been drunk at the stage while jumping around like a fool. In addition to this, Bernardo can sense the fact that his aura is different from before. Just then, one of the dudes walks up to Adrian saying he heard how he made Arwen his woman. Adrian keeps quiet as he continues, saying he was just a step too late because he has also had his eyes on Arwen for quite some time. Others in the room also said the same thing, talking about how they would have gotten her oath first if they knew what was going to happen. One expresses how dirty his mind is by wondering how Arwen would look under the armor. Adrian is tired of hearing their nonsense, and he turns to the dude, asking him if he has any siblings at home. The dude is surprised that Adrian is asking him such a stupid question, and he reminds him that he has a younger brother back home. Adrian tells him that this is a relief, and before the dude knows it, a punch lands straight on his face, sending him to the ground. He coughs up the drink in him, while everyone in the room watches in shock and horror. Even Bernardo has no idea what is happening, and Adrian walks up to the dude, telling him that it is a relief that his family line won't end because of what he is about to do. Without hesitation, Adrian steps on the dude's golden eggs, crushing them in front of everyone, leaving the dude to scream out in severe pain. Adrian coldly tells him that from that moment forward, his younger brother is now the heir. Adrian continues beating up the dude to the horror of the rest of the others. The dude who has been beaten is forced to ask Adrian why he is doing this, and Adrian tells him that he can tolerate them thinking of him as trash, but he won't accept the fact that they believe he is one. This leaves the others confused because they have no idea what he is talking about, but Adrian only beats up the guy even more. Adrian sends him flying with a punch, and after he is done with this, he calls on Bernardo, who immediately falls to his knees. He reminds Bernardo that he already told him that the day is going to be very entertaining. Deep down, Bernardo is left wondering why Adrian is acting all crazy because he is basically the worst among them. Adrian then tells Bernardo to summon the royal knights, and he initially hesitates but immediately has a rethink. He then rushes off, promising to follow Adrian's command. While Bernardo is gone, Adrian turns to the women, telling all of them to leave. One of the dudes wants to use the opportunity to leave, and Adrian reminds him that he said women are the only ones allowed to leave. However, he tells him that he is free to leave if he wants to, but he won't be leaving as a man. The dude immediately remembers how Adrian just crushed someone's golden eggs, and he panics. Adrian then tells the group that they are so arrogant because none of them even knelt in front of him as a prince, and they showed no iota of respect too. In fact, they were mocking him to his face, while insulting his knight too. Adrian then asks Carl what charges can be applied in a situation like this, and Carl, who just entered the room, reveals that since what they did is to look down on royalty, it actually constitutes an insult to royalty. The moment the dudes hear this, they freeze in fear because they know that they are so screwed. As if this is not enough, Carl mentions that by challenging the authority of the royal family, they have automatically committed treason. Carl urges Adrian to give the orders, asking him whom they are to force to their knees. With a cold smile on his face, Adrian tells the guards to force everyone to their knees. Later on, the king calls Adrian to the throne room to scold him, telling him that he wasted no time in causing a scene the moment his probation was lifted. The king screams out in anger, saying 14 noble children were arrested because he found a way to attach grand punishment to their offense. The king is pissed because, with Adrian invoking the authority of the royal family, the noble children have to be punished. At the same time, there is going to be a severe backlash, since 14 noble children are involved. As if Adrian already knows what the king is thinking about, he tells him not to worry about the backlash because the dudes are outcasts even within their own families. He mentions that they are irreparable trash that only tarnish their families' reputations by just having them around. Adrian then tells the king to send a letter, but the king has no idea what he is talking about. Adrian believes the king knows what he is talking about because there are people who can handle the internal noise of each family better than anyone else. These people are none other than the sisters and brothers of those who were arrested. With a crude smile on his face, he asks the king if he thinks he is wrong. But the king is left speechless, and he tells him to just leave. Adrian happily acknowledges the king's orders because he knows that there is nothing the king wants to say. After this, he meets with Adelia, who is trembling just at the sight of the prince. Adrian tries telling her that he is not going to hurt her, but this doesn't stop her from shaking like a leaf on water. Adrian immediately realizes that the girl must have gone through a whole lot in the hands of his old self. However, Adrian is surprised that no one knows about Agnes, as if the history of glory was totally erased and her peerless arts were dumped. The great prestige of the Bayern family, the lofty pride have all disappeared without a trace. But there is something more shocking. Adrian checks Adelia's stats, and he is left speechless because she has an SA rank talent for swordsmanship and an A rank in mana sensitivity. As for her other traits, she possesses the butcher trait, war maniac trait, fragile heart trait, caregiver trait, and the slave mentality trait. Adrian is left in shock because these traits are overpowered and scary. The butcher trait allows her to go crazy when she sees blood, and the war maniac basically turns her into a woman who is obsessed with battle. As for the slave mentality, it makes her dependent, and Adrian holds his head in total shock because Adelia has an unrivaled talent. However, the problem is that she doesn't even have a single trait to control the madness that she possesses. This leaves Adrian wondering if it is right for him to unleash Adelia on the world. After thinking about it for a minute, Adrian decides that he has no choice because he can't miss out on Adelia, who is a freaking S-rank talent. In addition, he believes that there is a trait that he can exploit, which is the slave mentality trait. This is a trait where one feels great joy in the existence of a master whom they serve with their heart. Adrian then walks up to Adelia, telling her to swear loyalty to him, leaving her confused because she has no idea what he means by this. Adrian tells her that he is simply demanding that she become his knight right there and then. Adelia falls to her knees, telling Adrian that she doesn't think it is something a humble girl like her can handle. Adrian then reminds her that she said her family is insignificant, but he assures her that he is going to take responsibility for her family. However, in return, she must swear loyalty to him and serve him as her master. Basically, Adrian is planning to help Adelia control her madness if she can't do that herself. Adelia then asks him if he is really going to take responsibility for her family, and Adrian says yes. In fact, he is willing to summon them to the capital if that is what she wants, so she can get to see them anytime. With a smile on her face, she tells Adrian that she is going to do what he says. Without hesitation, she pledges her loyalty to Adrian, telling him that she is going to serve him as her master and devote herself to him for her entire life. Adrian is glad to hear this, and he places his hand on her head, telling her that from that moment forward, she is going to obey his orders unconditionally. Her face turns red as she agrees to this, but Adrian, on the other hand, is wondering if he just made the right choice. In no time, rumors start flying around that Adrian has been doing a lot, and the news that he just turned a maid into his personal knight gets the top spot. They waste no time concluding that he is trying to build a harem for himself. When Adrian hears all the rumors, he is totally dumbfounded because they didn't really pay attention to him before. But now that he has gotten himself a personal knight, they are trying to take his head off. Even the king believes that he is indulging himself with women. Basically, everyone around him, from his uncle down to his annoying brother, has something to say about his decision. His mother also comes for a visit, and his mother, who is always on his side, also abandons him. The queen concludes that Adrian needs a wife, which is why he is acting all foolish, and she decides that this is what she is going to do. Adrian is stunned, but when he tries to say something or argue, his mother yells at him and then leaves afterward. Later on, Adrian calls Adelia to his chambers, telling her that it is time for her to gain mana. Adrian still remembers everything about Agnes, even if the world has forgotten her. Adrian gathers mana in his hands and pushes it into Adelia's body until she is able to sense mana. The system also informs Adrian that he has successfully imprinted mana onto Adelia and has even settled in her body, thus leading to the creation of a mana heart. Adelia is surprised when she finally sees what mana is, and Adrian lets her know that she just forged a mana heart. He tells her to practice on her own whenever she is free to do so, and he hasn't finished saying this when he falls to his knees in exhaustion. Adelia panics, asking Adrian if he is fine, but Adrian is just disappointed that he is already exhausted just from creating one tiny mana heart. Adrian assures Adelia that he is fine and only needs to rest a little. Adelia is completely overwhelmed that Adrian would go that far for her, but Adrian tells her that she can now leave. Just then, Adrian notices that she is looking at him in a funny way, and suddenly she bows to him, promising to serve him with loyalty for the rest of her life. Adrian is glad that she acknowledges this, and he tells her never to forget that he is her master. Adelia assures him she won't, but deep down Adrian is actually worried about her. Some days later, Carl tells Adrian that Bernardo is being held as a witness until the trial begins, and no one is allowed to see him till then. Adrian is worried that he would have to attend the trial, but Carl lets him know that royalty has no business with trials. Adrian is glad to hear this, but at the same time, he is worried that the whole thing is going a bit far. Adrian then turns to Adelia, who is busy cleaning a vase, to ask her how she's been coping. Adelia asks him what he means by this, and he replies, demanding to know if her mana heart has stabilized yet. Adelia lets him know that it has, and Adrian decides that Adelia will start to join him in training from that moment forward. He tells her to go change her clothes and meet him in the training grounds, while reminding her to stop cleaning because she is now a knight, not a maid. Moments later, Vale challenges Adrian's decision to bring Adelia to the training grounds. Adrian reminds Vale, just in case he hasn't heard, that he is making Adelia his knight. This only annoys Vale more, telling Adrian that being a knight is no joke. He yells at him, telling him that he has gotten reckless, but Adrian is pissed that the old man is starting to poke his nose into business that doesn't concern him. He asks him why he keeps coming to the training grounds if he doesn't like it there. They are in the middle of this argument when Adelia finishes the 10 laps Adrian asked her to, and she is completely out of breath. Adelia notices that Adrian and his uncle are having a scuffle, and she apologizes if it is because of her. Adrian tells her that she has nothing to worry about while revealing his plan to teach her the basic stance that day. Adrian shows Adelia what he means by taking his stance and swinging his sword some more. After he has shown her an example of what needs to be done, he tells her to give it a try. Adelia picks up her wooden sword and locks into focus mode. To Adrian and Vale's shock, Adelia copied the style so perfectly, even though she had only seen it once. After she is done, she asks if her stance is correct, but Adrian is too stunned to speak because he is worried that Adelia would definitely surpass him if he lets his guard down. He remembers that the slave mentality trait is submission to the strong, not respect to the weak, and Adelia is already not comfortable with how the trash prince tormented her in the past. Adrian freaks out when he realizes the grim outcome of what would happen if Adelia surpasses her. At this point, Vale is already talking about how good Adelia is, and when Adrian notices this, he tells him not to even think of taking Adelia away from him. Vale teases Adrian, telling him that there is nothing he wants to teach Adelia, while reminding him that he is just a novice who's only held a sword for a few months. In no time, the situation escalates between the two, as Vale unleashes his aura, trying to get Adrian to submit, telling him that he cannot handle Adelia. Adrian knows that his former self would have backed down at the sight of Vale's aura, but he is not his former self. Adrian replies, telling Vale that if he cannot handle Adelia, then no one can because he is the only one who has drunk the blood of numerous powerful entities, ultimately calling out a portion of Gruhorn's soul in the process. A red aura swells around Adrian as he stands tall in front of his uncle, telling him that Adelia is his. Adrian tells Vale not to look at Adelia, let alone covet her, because he truly hates it when someone takes what is his. Suddenly, Adrian's reality of things starts to go cold, and he realizes that Gruhorn's soul is about to take over Adrian's weak body. He quickly steps in, puts the soul back in its place, and he returns to his senses. Vale reveals that a single ordinary knight can save the lives of 10 soldiers, and further adds that a single outstanding knight can save the lives of 100 soldiers. In fact, he believes that Adelia has what it takes to save 1,000 or even more soldiers. Adrian wonders if Vale has already seen how great Adelia is going to be for him as a commander to start acting the way he is. However, Adrian lets Vale know that he doesn't really care. Vale asks him if he doesn't care if Adelia can save countless lives, but Adelia cuts in, telling Vale that her entire existence now belongs to Adrian, so he cannot follow whatever Vale says. Vale is left stunned when he hears this, but Adrian, on the other hand, is glad that he dragged Gruhorn's soul out because the slave mentality is bound to submit to a higher entity. Since Adelia has made her choice, Adrian asks Vale if he has nothing else to teach him, because the goal from the start was to help him lose weight, which he has already achieved. Adrian urges Vale not to interfere in his affairs again if he wishes to continue visiting the palace. Vale agrees to this, but even after that day, Vale continues to visit so he can watch over Adelia. However, he can't necessarily do anything, since nagging is not allowed. Deep down, Adrian is satisfied to see how calm his arrogant uncle is. Adelia is in the middle of her training when she suddenly achieves sword resonance, shocking Adrian and Vale. Adrian claps for her, but deep down, he is worried that Adelia is going to surpass him in no time if things continue the way they are. Vale then walks over to Adrian, asking him if he also taught Adelia the mana heart, and Adrian confirms this, demanding to know if there is anything wrong with it. Vale suddenly screams at Adrian, asking him if it is not enough that he already learned such a cheap trick. Adrian notices that Adelia is listening to everything Vale is saying, and he immediately tells Vale to make himself scarce. Vale continues yapping, saying there was a much better path and Adrian ruined it. Adrian simply tells Carl to escort Vale out of the training grounds. However, Vale refuses, saying he is going to leave by himself. As he walks away, Adelia asks Adrian what Vale meant by a cheap trick. She wants to know if the mana heart is trash, but Adrian assures her that it is not. However, Adelia still can't get over what Vale said, and Adrian tells her that his uncle is ignorant, just like the rest of the people of that era. He lets Adelia know that they wouldn't have thrown away the mana heart if they knew what it could do, but he assures Adelia that she is going to find out soon enough what the mana heart can do. Sometime later, Vale returns to the training grounds and Adrian is shocked to see him. Vale goes straight to why he is there, telling Adrian to prove the strength of the mana heart, assuring him that he is going to use just a single ring, and if he can push him back just a step, he is going to acknowledge him. Adrian grabs his sword too and reminds Vale that the reward for their bet still remains, granting a wish. Vale agrees to this, telling Adrian that if he wins, he is going to grant him whatever he wants, no matter what it is. Adrian wastes no time going after Vale, and he aims for the neck directly, but Vale dodges with ease. Adrian doesn't hold back as he continues with his assault, but none of his efforts are even able to touch Vale's hair. Vale stands like a rock, dodging everything that Adrian throws at him. Vale finally blocks his strike at some point, taunting him and asking if he is done. Adrian is pushed back, and he looks exhausted from all the failed swings. Vale asks him if he has given up already, but Adrian assures him that he is still as hard as a rock. Deep down, Adrian has no choice but to admit the simple truth that his uncle is pretty strong. He figures out that Vale is waiting for him to draw out his mana so he can give him a taste of an even more miserable defeat. Adrian knows that it is pretty obvious that he would lose with the current level of mana heart that he has. Adrian tells Vale that it is funny how knights achieved great things with mana hearts in the past, but because a new technique appeared, the other arts are now treated as trash. Vale asks him what he is trying to say, and Adrian reveals that his thoughts are different as he lets Vale know that it was not mana heart that was weak, but the masters wielding it. Adrian mentions that just because it is mana heart doesn't mean that they are all the same. With a smile on his face, he asks Vale if he has heard of the martial spirit hymn, but Vale reminds Adrian that they are there to cross swords, not to chat about boring things. Adrian expected Vale to say this, since he called mana heart a crude technique used only by mercenaries. Vale teases Adrian, telling him that he has been talking forever while asking if he needs more time to catch his breath, but Adrian says no. Adrian gets into a scary stance as he chants a hymn about how 100 victories have been his pride and power. He continues chanting the hymn until he is able to create a martial arts spirit hymn with his mana heart. Aura shoots out of his sword, and the system informs him that he has created a sparring hymn. Without wasting time, he activates the hymn as he prepares to show the true power of the mana heart. However, Vale doesn't appear to be moved by everything Adrian is doing, as he lets him know that whatever he does, it is still the same. He mentions that as long as what Adrian possesses is the mana heart, he will never be able to defeat the mana chain. Adrian ignores him and charges toward Vale, but Vale blocks his attack. Adrian admits that the mana ring has the properties of causing mana backflow through the mana heart, and just one strike blocked by Vale has proven that. Vale notices that Adrian is struggling, and he mocks him, telling him that he is quite good at enduring. Adrian, on the other hand, doesn't really care about what the mana ring can do because to obtain the sparring hymn, he had to spar over 100 times while withstanding the mana of rings over 1,000 times. The sparring hymn is a power forged to deal with knights who use the mana ring. Adrian's body and sword continue to unleash a serious level of mana, which is a result of the hymn of sparring. Adrian believes that he finally has the perfect opponent to try it on, and without holding back, he leaps toward Vale, swinging at him endlessly. At this point, Vale is already worried because he wasn't expecting Adrian to last that long. Vale is forced to push Adrian back at some point while asking him how he is able to do what he is doing. Adrian reminds him that he already told him that not all mana hearts are the same. Vale decides to get serious while scolding Adrian for being arrogant. He lands a powerful strike on Adrian that sends him flying into the distance, while telling him that he has no intention of playing around with him anymore. However, he assures him that it is commendable that he was able to last that long. Adrian, on the other hand, confirms with this that a normal grade martial spirit hymn is insufficient. Adrian's body looks totally battered just from one strike. Adrian then starts with his boring talks again, telling Vale that the knights of the past made a mistake of not leaving their descendants with strong opponents to face because they had already cleared out all the danger. Initially, everything was passed down intact, from the sword techniques to the correct method of refining the heart and the shining martial spirit hymn. However, time eats away at the shining achievements that the knights had, which eventually caused them to be forgotten. He talks about tales about dragons that have never been seen and giant kings that sound like myth. Adrian says he is pretty sure that all these would have sounded like a fairy tale. He is sure that new martial art hymns would have been created, but all of these were at best to grant victory against 10 knights or overcoming 100 soldiers. He is pretty sure that the hymns were downgraded to just facing humans alone, ultimately rendering them obsolete. Adrian says the mana chain is a technique that would never raise someone to a level of divine dominance. Vale is totally confused about everything he has heard, while asking Adrian if he spent the entire day drinking. Just then, Adrian calls out Vale's name, telling him that he is an arrogant knight who has no idea what he and others have lost. Suddenly, Adrian's aura goes from blue to dark red, and he tells Vale that he is about to teach him the things that he has lost. Adrian's body is overwhelmed with aura as he tells Vale that he is going to teach him a technique that was strong enough to split a dragon's scales and drink its hot blood. Adrian tries to tap into the dragon slaying him, but the system tells him that his current abilities cannot handle that high-grade hymn. Adrian groans in pain as several levels of the hymn are omitted until only a quarter of it is left. Once he is able to access just a quarter of it, he makes his move and goes after Vale. He swings his sword at Vale, but he blocks. Suddenly, he realizes that his sword is starting to crack, and if this continues, he is going to be overpowered. Vale immediately resorts to a desperate move, which he uses to block Adrian's attack, resulting in a big explosion that sends Adrian flying into the distance. Adrian crashes to the ground, and as the dust clears, he recognizes what Vale did. He reminds him that he said he wouldn't use more than one ring. It turns out that Vale had to engage his 4 rings, but even at this, his sword was still cut in half. Adrian admits deep down that mana from the heart is inferior to the mana from the ring, but in that present moment, he lets Vale know that he lost the match, and this leaves Vale totally stunned. Later on, Adrian wakes in his room from a nightmare where Gruhorn is trying to take over. He sits up with sweat running down his face, and he realizes that this is the price to pay for forcefully drawing out the power of the martial spirit hymn. Thanks to the fact that the dragon-slaying hymn has become a myth, his body couldn't handle it and got wrecked. However, Adrian doesn't really care because it is worth the risk. Adrian then concentrates his mana to upgrade the Hymn of Sparring, and in no time the system informs him that it is successful. Adrian lets out a good smile because he believes that it should be enough to face Jillian, the third prince. Just then, Adelia enters the room and expresses her happiness that Adrian is finally awake after losing consciousness. She reveals that it was total chaos after he passed out because the queen crashed out at her brother. Adrian doesn't really care about this, and he believes that it even serves them right. Adelia then mentions that Vale left a message saying he should be notified whenever Adrian wakes up. However, Adrian tells Adelia not to report yet because he would like to rest for a while. Apparently, he might suffer a great punishment if he doesn't properly recover his spirit, which was damaged by the excessive use of the martial spirit hymn. Basically, reality and memories of the past will mix into a chaotic mess, and at some point, the boundary of reality will totally collapse, ultimately turning him into a madman. He would be trapped in a severed world where he would endlessly act out moments of his martial spirits. Shivers run down his body with the realization that he might actually be trapped in the sword's memories again after he finally managed to become human. Later on, Adrian tells Adelia about her ancestor Agnes, revealing that she is a great woman and she should be able to inherit the martial spirit hymn that she left behind. However, he lets her know that she would have to grow much more than she currently is to fit into Agnes's shoes. Adrian then asks Adelia what she plans to do by learning the sword, and Adelia stutters before giving her answer. She mentions that if she could truly become a knight, she would become Adrian's sword. Adrian is stunned when he hears this because some great hymns in the past started with a heartfelt oath. Adelia's aura fills the room as she declares that she is going to dedicate everything she has to Adrian. The system then tells Adrian that Adelia has dedicated the hymn of subordination to him. Adrian is blown away when he sees what Adelia's hymn is, and he is able to contain it in his palms. Apparently, a martial spirit hymn influences others too, and just then, a new hymn known as the Hymn of Domination is created. Talking about the hymn of subordination, it is dedicated to the master, but a martial spirit hymn is an oath of submission that binds souls together. Adrian is blown away because he can't believe that a descendant of Agnes can create the hymn of subordination. Adrian is glad because he has been able to receive unexpected help. It turns out that as long as he is the target of the hymn of subordination, Adelia's growth will also work in his favor. Adrian is completely overwhelmed, so he has no choice but to thank Adelia. Sometime later, Adrian is minding his business when his mother shows up to check on him. Adrian subtly replies that he is fine, but deep down, he can sense the awkwardness coming from his mother, who cherished him as a fatso. The queen then asks him if he resents Vale for what happened, but Adrian assures her that he doesn't. However, the woman doesn't want to believe this because Vale has always been nagging him, but Adrian maintains what he said, assuring the queen that he holds no bad feelings against his uncle. Adrian is not worried, since he has already landed a blow on his uncle, which means he has struck his pride, and it must be hard for him to endure the inner shame he planted in him that day. Adrian believes that Vale would be able to leap further if he had the ability, but if he cannot, then he might even lose his precious martial arts. Nonetheless, Adrian doesn't think he really cares what happens. The Queen continues by saying Vale has spent his whole life closer to the sword than to people, so he basically has a clumsy and rough side because of this. However, it appears that he has recently been proud of Adrian because he even went to the king to persuade him. It turns out that he was the one who was able to negotiate the early removal of the probation placed on Adrian. However, Adrian went ahead to cause more trouble the moment the probation was lifted, leaving Vale in a difficult position. Adrian then realizes why Vale acted so disapprovingly, but at the same time he is curious to know why Vale would go to that length for him. Soon afterward, a scholar who goes by the name Nicolo is assigned to Adrian to make him study, and this doesn't sit well with Adrian. He falls to the ground to protest, saying he doesn't want to be taught because he sees no reason why he should. Nicolo tells him that if he doesn't learn, he is no different from a beast, and Adrian yells at him, asking him if he is seriously calling him a beast. However, Nicolo tells him that he has just begun his studies, so he can't even call him that just yet. Frustrated, Adrian tells the old man that he already knows everything, even though he looks young. Nicolo decides to make a bet with Adrian, since he is claiming to be all-knowing. He tells him that they are going to discuss a few topics together, and if his skills are truly as he claims, he will no longer visit him. Adrian quickly accepts this with a smile on his face, and before he knows it, he has become fully engrossed in the lecture without even realizing it. Nicolo then hands him a book called The Theory of the Iron-Blooded Monarch, telling him that he is going to find it interesting. Nicolo mentions that it evaluates the relationship between ruler and subject as a kind of contract or transaction. Adrian is already tuned into the book, while Nicolo is still busy explaining how the ruler receives military and economic support in exchange for protecting the subject. In addition, the subject seeks the ruler's protection and political stability in return for their loyalty. Adrian is glued to the book, and he agrees with Nicolo, saying all relationships are supposed to be about give and take. In no time, they spent the entire day on this, and Nicolo is the one who later had to end the lecture. He promises to return the next day, and Adrian sends him off with a smile, telling him that he will be waiting. It wasn't until Nicolo left that it dawned on Adrian that he had been studying the entire day without even realizing it. On the other hand, Nicolo is also impressed because Adrian is not as the rumors suggest. Days later, Adrian rolls on his bed complaining about how bored he is as Carl stares at him helplessly. Adrian wonders if he has been too diligent in the way he lives, and since he's not training, boredom is about to end him. However, it is important to note that his body is still recovering. Just then, he is informed that Vale is there to see him. Adelia asks him what his decision is, and he tells them to let Vale in. Adrian was already expecting him to visit since it had been a few days since the last duel. The moment Vale enters the room, Adrian can see how bad he looks, and he realizes that he hasn't overcome the inner demon he planted in him. Vale finally pulls together the courage to speak, and he apologizes to Adrian. Adrian is shocked that his uncle is apologizing to him, and Vale mentions that he broke the promise he made to himself while causing Adrian a severe injury in the process. Vale mentions that he has no excuse whatsoever, but deep down, Adrian knows that the reason he had to recuperate wasn't because of Vale's aura blade, but because he overused the hymn of true dragon slaying. Vale then tells Adrian to tell him what he desires according to the bet they made. In fact, he lets Adrian know that he is willing to surrender his arm if that is what he wants. Adrian stares at him disgustingly, telling him that he has no use for things like that. Adrian cannot believe that his uncle, who is a great martial artist, is seriously struggling with mental issues. Adrian then tells him that he is going to be generous, and he reveals his first wish, which is that he wants Vale to let him go out on an outing. Vale is surprised that this is his wish, and he reminds Adrian that he is no longer on probation, so he can go out however he likes. However, Adrian corrects him, saying he is not talking about a one-day trip because he wants something preferably outside the capital. Vale mentions that it is going to take some time to arrange the schedule, and with the upcoming banquet, going too far will be impossible. Adrian lets him know that he is fine with his, and Vale prepares to leave, assuring him that he is going to contact him once a schedule is set. After he leaves, Adrian notices that Carl is staring at him, and he asks him why. Carl mentions how unexpected the whole situation is because he was expecting him to demand something much more terrifying. Carl mentions that it is basically a rare opportunity to take advantage, since Vale was the one who broke his promise. Adrian then says he felt bad for Vale after seeing the way he was acting. Carl laughs out loud when he realizes that Adrian is actually capable of empathy, and Adrian protests, telling Carl that he is getting a little more comfortable in recent times. They are in the middle of this when Adelia tells him that there is a letter for him. Adrian opens the letter and realizes that it is from Arwen to inform him of her latest achievement. Adrian is pleased by the latest information because these are the things he wants to hear. 5 days later, Vale sent Adrian the schedule, and 2 days afterward, the day of departure arrived. Adrian is completely excited that they are going on a trip, and he pushes his head out of the carriage to ask his uncle which territory they are going to. Vale can see just how excited he is about the whole thing, and he tells him to get back in the carriage, promising to explain. Vale reveals that they are going to Ellen County, which is the royal court's greatest production site for weaponry. Apparently there are iron mines in the territory that supply high-grade iron, and there is a guild of artisan smiths that refine it. Without exaggerating it, Vale lets Adrian know that more than half of the weapons supplied to the royal family come from Ellen. Adrian is glad to hear that they are heading to a territory that makes swords because it is high time he gets a sword of his own. It turns out that he had plans to take a sword from the armory, but Carl tells Adrian that they can issue him any weapons per royal decree. This only means that he would have to travel outside the royal palace to get himself a sword. Even though Vale looks rugged, Adrian realizes that he is thoughtful because he is literally dragging him to a place where he can get a good sword. With this, their 20-day journey to Ellen County begins. Apparently, Ellen County is just a stop on the road because their actual destination is the Iron Lion Castle, which is 2 days away from Ellen County. After they are done at the castle, they are meant to journey back to the capital, but at the moment, Adrian can't believe that he has been stuck in a carriage for days without moving. Also, Adelia is sitting opposite him, but she is no fun whatsoever. Everything he's been asking her has been ending with a yes or no answer, which is obviously boring. Since he has all the time in the world, Adrian decides to check his mana heart. Thanks to overusing the dragon slaying him, his mana heart actually went completely dry, and he believes that it is time for him to refill his mana heart. Adrian closes his eyes to fully focus on gathering mana from every corner as the carriage travels through the lonely road. Suddenly, Adrian notices something shocking, and this is the fact that his mana heart has gotten bigger than the last time. The system informs him that he attempted an extraordinary feat that is beyond his mana capacity, which gave him a glimpse of a colossal will. Adrian realizes that this is the effect of forcibly using the hymn of dragon slaying. The system then tells him that due to the expanded mana heart, his physical constitution has also changed significantly, which means his body is now able to endure more mana. Basically, he has now reached the stage of sword expert, and the connection to the origin has somewhat improved. As if this is not enough, Adrian learns that some of the restrictions on his recovered authorities have been lifted. The ones he could previously use have also improved significantly. Adrian lets out a fulfilling smile when he sees all of these, and Adelia can actually see that there is something making the prince happy. Soon afterward, they arrive at Ellen County and they are welcomed by the head of the territory, Edgar, and his eldest son, Torrance. Adrian thanks the two for the hospitality, and since Adrian is presumed to be exhausted on his journey, Edgar offers to take him to his room. As they walk through the mansion, Adrian can see why they refer to the territory as a weapon production territory. However, he is not entirely impressed because all the weapons he has seen so far are just low-tier items that look flashy but are actually useless in combat. Adrian is disappointed because he believes that he won't be able to find the item he is looking for this way. Just then, he asks Edgar if the blacksmith's guild is located in the territory, and Edgar confirms this. Adrian then tells Edgar that he would like to visit the guild instead. On their way to the workshop, Edgar tells Adrian that blacksmiths are rough and stubborn people, which is why they often ignore the Lord whenever they are concentrated on work. Upon entering the workshop, Adrian is immediately locked in as he spots the blasting heat furnace. Edgar tells him to speak up if the heat is too much, but Adrian is totally locked in because the whole scenario reminds him of when he was a sword. Surprisingly, among all the other blacksmiths working on their craft, there is one who draws him in, and it is an old man in the distance. Adrian stands in awe as he watches the man hit the hot iron with his hammer, ultimately reminding him of when he was reincarnated as a sword. Adelia is forced to clean Adrian's face because of the amount of sweat pouring down his face. Adelia, touching him, finally jerks him back to reality, and he realizes that he was fully engrossed in the whole thing. Just then, the leader of the blacksmiths called the artisans from their workplace to come and greet Adrian. Edgar introduces the dude to the prince, but Adrian doesn't pay much attention to him because he is fully engrossed in the old man, who is still busy working on his craft. The leader of the blacksmiths spots him and screams at him, asking him what the hell it is that he is doing. He asks him to stop what he is doing and greet Adrian, but Adrian grabs the dude, stopping him from distracting the old man. Adrian also notices that the rest of the blacksmiths are not all that happy, since they were dragged over to greet him against their will while they were working. Adrian is not pleased himself either, because he didn't even order the person in charge to do this. He then tells the blacksmiths to return to their workplace unless they want the furnace to die out. Without hesitation, the gang runs back to where they were working, and Adrian continues watching the old man do his thing. With complete dedication and focus, he smashes the iron, shaping it into form, and while he was doing this, Adrian was overtaken by a weird sensation that leaves a chill running through his body. Later on, Edgar informs Adrian that the old blacksmith has been repeating the process of forging swords and melting them down for the past 6 months. Adrian asks Edgar if the swords he made are failures, But Edgar says there is no way to know because every sword the old man makes is said to be a masterpiece, which is why he is called the Master Smith of Swords. In fact, the bunch of swords he has made so far seemed completely flawless, which is why it is a mystery that he melted all of them down. In addition, for the past month, he has barely slept and has been clinging only to his work. Edgar mentions that they have been worried because he is no longer a young person. Adrian, on the other hand, can see that the man is nothing but a true craftsman. Days later, Adrian continues visiting the forge every morning while leaving late at night, and during this time, the old man simply continued with his work while Adrian watched in silence. Before Adrian had arrived, there were tensions that he might cause a ruckus, but to their surprise, there were no incidents whatsoever. And soon afterward, the day for the prince to leave finally arrives. Adrian expresses his disappointment that he wasn't able to see the completed version of the sword before leaving. He turns around to leave the forge, telling his men that they are going to leave very early the next morning since there is a farewell party that night. Even Edgar was devastated because he had hoped that the prince would see the sword completed by the master smith before leaving. Later that night, Adrian is preparing for the party when Edgar comes rushing over, telling him that the master smith has completed the sword. Adrian rushes over to find the old man cleaning the sword, and as he raises it into the air, it leaves a bright show of excellence. The old man then turns to Adrian, bows to him, and presents the sword to him. Edgar is shocked when he sees this, and Adrian, on the other hand, gracefully collects the sword, which is befitting for a king. Adrian asks the old man if the sword has a name, and he reveals that he is thinking of calling it Twilight. Adrian asks if this is for dawn or dusk, and the old man says it is already dusk for him, but it is dawn for Adrian. Adrian is pleased by his answer, and he even starts to laugh before telling the old man that he is pretty eloquent for a blacksmith. The old man chuckles a bit before losing his balance, and Adrian quickly grabs him. He then tells Carl to inform Vale that he will be spending the night with the old man. While they are alone, the master smith reveals that it was the day that Adrian arrived and stood behind him that the sword took shape as if it were already waiting for him. He mentions that the sword basically decided the day that it would be born. Adrian is surprised to hear this, and he decides to let him in on a little secret. He moves closer to whisper in his ear what is obviously his true identity, and the master smith is completely overwhelmed, so he starts to shake on the bed. The master smith heaves a sigh of relief and says he finally understands everything. He tells Adrian to give him the sword for a moment. Adrian does as told, and with his last strength, he tells Adrian that he hopes the sword will become as great as him. Adrian holds his hand, assuring him that it will, and with this, the old man signs out. The next day, as Adrian prepares to leave, Edgar shows up with a beautiful sword, carefully packaged for him. He tells Edgar that the sword he brought for him is a magic sword, and it would be much easier to use than the one the old man gave him. Adrian takes the sword to inspect it, and he expresses his surprise at how amazing the magic sword is. Deep down, Adrian sees the sword as a mid-grade sword, which is not entirely great. However, he decides to take it too, while thanking Edgar for practically giving him two great swords. He tells Edgar that the Ellen family is truly loyal to the royal family, which is a good thing. Edgar, on the other hand, is having an internal crash out because he actually wanted to use the flashy magic sword as bait to get the Master Smith's sword back, but he ended up giving Adrian two good swords for nothing. When it is time for them to leave, Vale informs the troop that the carriages and infantry will follow from behind, while the cavalry will ride ahead at maximum speed. Since they are behind schedule already, he talks about how important it is for them to hurry up. Adrian shows up and teases him about how busy he looks. He then mentions that he didn't even see him the entire time they were in Ellen County. Vale confesses that the king had another assignment for him, and this is when Adrian realizes that his excursion was not particularly free. Vale confirms this and urges him to get ready, and since they plan to ride fast to reach Iron Castle that night, he tells Adrian that he will have to ride a horse. This is when Adrian reveals a shocking truth that he doesn't know how to ride a horse, which is obviously not his fault, since he was a sword until some months ago. Nonetheless, the journey to the castle continued as planned, but it was full of twists and turns, and even though they were not able to get to the castle in half a day as planned, they got to the castle in a full day. Adrian is impressed at how magnificent the castle is the moment they arrive at the gate. There are knights at the door to welcome them, and they are led by Count Walladin. Adrian can sense the tense spirit from the knights, and he is not entirely surprised, but he decides to step on their toes even more. He spots Arwen in the back, and he calls her forward. Arwen approaches the prince and bows to him, telling him how much she has waited to see him again. At this point, the other knights and apprentice knights are burning with fury. Because of the hostility directed toward the prince, Adelia's aura also leaks out in anger, and Adrian quickly notices this. Adrian immediately walks up to Adelia to calm her down, and Adelia finally comes back to her senses. Adrian is thankful that he developed Adelia's slave mentality early on. Adrian then turns to Arwen to follow him because they have a lot to catch up on. Deep down, he wants the other knights to also follow them. Moments later, Adrian changes to his training outfit and he heads to the training grounds where he tells the apprentice knights and knights that he would like to witness the swordsmanship of the Iron Lions, which is said to be the best in the kingdom. He asks the knights who is going to spar with him first. But there is no one who is immediately ready to jump out to spar with the prince. Adrian believes that they are worried because he is a prince, and he tells them that he is going to stake the Leonberg name that no one would be responsible for whatever the outcome of the spar is. Even with this, there is still reluctance among the knights, and Adrian ups the scales, calling them faint-hearted knights. One of the knights, who is a redhead, can no longer take the insult and steps out. He introduces himself as Dale of the Dinant, and he tells the prince that he still cannot be called a representative of the Iron Lions, but he asks Adrian if he can stand in his presence. Adrian assures him that there is no need for permission since he was the one who asked for it. Dale then dashes toward the prince with resentment while urging him to be careful. He tries to land a hit on Adrian's head, but he easily blocks it and throws him back. Dale crashes into the ground, and he is knocked out just from one strike. Adrian then smiles at the crowd, asking them if there is anyone who would like to take Dale's place. Another dude who introduces himself as Paul emerges, but he is also knocked out mercilessly. Adrian continues to run through the apprentice knights as if they are nothing, while doing it with no stress whatsoever. After he has already beaten up the apprentice knights so much that he is bored with it, Adrian starts to think of how to get the official knights to fight him. He immediately finds a way out and he calls Arwen's name, telling her that she will be returning with him when he leaves. Arwen is initially surprised, but immediately bows to Adrian to acknowledge his order. She hasn't finished saying this when one of the knights calls Adrian's name from behind. Adrian is surprised at how easy it is to bait them. The knight, who is a tall, apparently scary dude, walks up to Adrian, suggesting that they liven things up a bit with a bet. He wants to use Arwen as the trophy, but Adrian immediately denies his request, telling him that Arwen is not a tournament prize. Adrian suggests that they use something else instead, and he tells Carl to bring him Twilight. Adrian draws his sword, telling the knight that he's going to give him the sword if he wins. Arwen is shocked when she realizes that Adrian is about to engage in a live duel, and she tells him that she would be a better choice, but Adrian refuses. Adrian tells her that she is 1,000 times more precious than the sword because the value of a swordmaster cannot be compared to a mere sword. The knight gladly agrees to Adrian's request before introducing himself as Dunham of the Fahrenheit family. He mentions that he is an official knight of the Iron Lion Knights and is on the verge of achieving the triple chain. Adrian mocks him, saying he is basically still a double chain knight, and this only makes him even madder. Dunham mentions that his sword is the 17th sword that was made by the Master Smith of Swords. Dunham promises to give Adrian the sword if he wins, and Adrian smiles, while revealing that his own sword is also made by the Master Smith, and it is the 100th work of the Master Smith. Dunham is surprised by this because he has never heard rumors of the Master Smith making a 100th sword. Adrian doesn't blame him for this because it is the Master Smith's final work that was completed just a few days ago. Dunham then summons his aura as he prepares to engage Adrian, while claiming that Adrian is walking a misguided path, but he is going to show him his utmost with the spar. Adrian smirks when he hears Dunham call his path a misguided one, and he decides to teach Dunham a lesson while telling Adelia to watch closely because this is the path she will continue to walk on from that moment forward. Adelia agrees to this, promising Adrian that she will surely do what he wants. Meanwhile, Vale is having a meeting with the commander in his chambers. It turns out that this is the 4th time they will be visiting the castle. Apparently, the 4th prince has no interest in the throne, which is why he might not come to the castle. However, the 3rd and 5th princes visited while Adrian was on probation. Even the 2nd prince stopped by at the castle some time ago. Walladin admits that Adrian remains the legitimate heir, no matter how bad his reputation might be. However, Walladin blames Vale for how things have gotten, saying he has the larger share of the blame because if he had supported the 1st prince even a little, he wouldn't have become isolated. Since Vale has always abandoned Adrian, he is now surprised that he is trying to be good toward him. Deep down, Vale knows that Walladin is not wrong because he actually once cast aside Adrian. Vale saw Adrian as a man who was not deemed to be a ruler, but a tyrant. It turns out that he once scolded him one day for being intoxicated by some wicked potion, and in anger, Adrian had charged at his own uncle with a sword. Adrian saw him as a hopeless scoundrel, and when he returned to the north in disappointment, Adrian sent him a poisoned wine, shamelessly calling it a gift while enclosing a letter with it. Vale had gobbled down the wine, and as he burned away the cheap poison Adrian put in it with his mana, he also burned away whatever little familial attention that he had left with it. However, this unbearable nephew suddenly changed and became a different person who endures grueling training. In fact, he became someone who started growing every day. Walladin then reminds Vale that he was the one who once said Adrian must never become king. Vale, in his heart, knows that Adrian is now a changed person. and he tells Wolodin to give Adrian a chance so that he might at least stand at the same starting line as the other princes. Wolodin is shocked when Vale bows to him, begging him to reconsider. Wolodin expresses his disbelief, saying he has no clue whether it is Vale who has changed or it is Adrian who has changed. Suddenly, one of the knights comes rushing in to tell the two what is happening on the training grounds. On their way to the training grounds, Wolodin tells Vale that he has nothing to worry about because Dunham knows his limits, so nothing serious will happen. He assures Vale that even in a live blade duel, he wouldn't dare beat royalty senselessly. However, Vale tells Wolodin that he should not be worried about the first prince, but his knight. Wolodin berates Vale, telling him that he has really become strange because he looks pale, while also spewing nonsense. By the time they get to the training ground, Wolodin cannot believe his eyes as Dunham is thrown to the ground, ultimately knocked out. Wolodin watches in disbelief, and Vale reminds him that he already told him to expect something else. It turns out that during the spar, Adrian had noticed what his uncle used to say about a double ring knight. It dawned on him that his current hymn of sparring is insufficient, but he can't afford to bring out the dragon-slaying hymn against a regular knight. Due to this, he activated hyperfocus, where everything becomes quiet and his body doesn't feel like his own. With this, he is able to calculate Dunham's trajectory and move, giving him the perfect angle to land a counterstrike that sends Dunham flying into the distance. The spar continues, but at this point Adrian has totally gotten into the feel of it, and he easily takes down his opponents, as if they were nothing. In the end, Adrian had racked up 5 consecutive wins, and the knights are ecstatic when they see this. Thanks to this, Adrian is able to add another verse to the hymn of sparring, which ultimately increases its grade to an extraordinary grade. The hymn of sparring proceeds to upgrade to the hymn of dueling, and Adrian heaves a sigh of relief because he actually succeeded. Exhausted, he falls to his knees, and one of the knights rushes over to check on him, telling him that he pays respect to the victory he achieved. Surprisingly, the knights start to celebrate while hailing Adrian's fighting spirit. Adrian is surprised to see this because moments ago they were preparing to tear him apart. Wolodin tells Vale that the knights are simple men by nature and nothing excites them more than the sword and victory. Wolodin tells Adrian that by the expression on his face he was expecting a different reaction. Vale tells Adrian that a fair defeat is more valuable than a foul victory. One of the knights teases Dunham, saying he might be the only resentful one because he has to offer up the sword he bragged about so much. Adrian is left dumbfounded because he thought everything he knew he had forgotten and abandoned, along with the mana heart. But it appears that there was at least one thing that hasn't changed because being gracious in defeat and revering the strong is the spirit of the knights. When it is time for Adrian and his entourage to leave, Adrian tells Wolodin to keep what happened during his stay a secret. Wolodin is surprised by this because he believes that it would be helpful to Adrian's reputation to make it known. However, Adrian doesn't want it known yet, since there is someone he wishes to mess with a little. Later that evening, they find a good place to camp, and Carl offers to go scout the surroundings. On the other hand, Arwen looks lost, but Adrian is pretty sure that she is going to adapt in no time. Adrian enters his tent to find Adelia tending to his things. Adrian is disappointed that the person he chose because of her S-rank aptitude is still doing things only a maid would do. Adrian simply proceeds to his bed, leaving Adelia wondering if there is something she did wrong. However, Adrian tells her that she is free to leave, and after she is gone, Adrian realizes that the Iron Lion Knights were different from what he thought they would be. When he was at the castle, he used the authority of judgment, and he realized that the majority of regular knights did not possess swordsmanship talent surpassing B grade. In the past, these were people who would not have been able to reach intermediate sword expert level even after a lifetime of grueling training. They would have been ordinary people who would have faded away, but at the current moment, they have reached a realm equivalent to a sword expert in their 20s or 30s. Basically, the caliber possessed by a superhuman has declined beyond comparison, while the caliber of ordinary people has risen dramatically. It suddenly dawns on Adrian that all of these are because of the mana chain. In the past, his uncle would have aimed for transcendence, which is why he was actually pissed that he threw away the possibility of that. However, this era is an era where there is no chance to build achievement beyond an extraordinary grade. Adrian figures out that everything is due to the flow of time, and he admits that he does not know the era well. Adrian concludes that he is going to start learning everything from the beginning. He is in the middle of this when Vale shows up, telling Adrian that it is not too late because if he puts in the effort from that moment forward, he can achieve his dream. Adrian is confused as he doesn't know what dream the dude is talking about. Vale lets him know that he has already won the hearts of the Iron Lions because if it were the other princes, he would not have been able to mingle with them so casually. Vale commends him, telling him that it was a wise decision. But Adrian still doesn't know what trash he is talking about. Adrian is forced to ask him if he has gone mad, but Vale tells him that there were conditions they agreed on concerning the bet he made with him. Adrian remembers the bet with the third prince, and he is about to say it is still ongoing when Vale cuts in, telling him that the bet was to defeat a double chain knight. This is when it dawns on Adrian that he has actually won the bet since he took down a couple of knights. Vale then tells Adrian that he is going to do as promised, and he pledges his loyalty to Adrian, telling him that he is going to officially support him as the first prince of the kingdom. Adrian is confused as he doesn't know what Vale meant by official support, but it suddenly dawns on him what Vale is talking about. Adrian is left dumbfounded because he never told him that he would like to be king. However, Adrian's life soon becomes chaotic because by the time they return to the capital, Vale's official support had been made known. Adrian's quarters are immediately stormed by newly assigned royal knights, soldiers, and attendants. Adrian yells at Carl, telling him to get rid of the crowd because they are making his life harder. However, Carl lets him know that he can't because they are all there via royal decree, and even if he orders them to leave, they are not going to listen. Adrian then tells Carl to at least clear them out of his sight because they are annoying him to death. Carl is able to do this, and Adrian ultimately enjoys some peace and quiet. He hasn't even enjoyed 5 minutes of peace when Jillian barges into the room to accuse Adrian of playing his game so well. He claims Adrian was secretly learning swordsmanship from Vale, while revealing his grand ambitions too. Jillian claims that he was holding back before because he didn't want to disgrace his brother, and Adrian teases him, telling him that he is so grateful that he didn't embarrass him. Jillian then screams at Adrian, telling him that he has made a big mistake because he intends to make him pay for deceiving him. Deep down, Adrian is boiling because he blames Vale for telling everyone that he has eyes for the throne when he obviously doesn't. After this, Adrian finds Vale to tell him that he is going to play along for a while, but urges him to back out at an appropriate time because he is not interested in being king. Adrian asks him why he went ahead to start things without consulting him first, and Vale asks him if he is worried about Balarhard's family, since they are the shield that protects the kingdom from the monsters of the northern mountains. Vale assures Adrian that as long as the royal family and the nobles don't forget the harshness of winter, nothing bad will happen to the Balarhard family. Adrian expresses his relief when he hears this, and Vale tells Adrian that it was going to happen anyway, revealing that it was just a matter of time. Vale asks Adrian if he truly doesn't know the fate of a firstborn who fails to ascend the throne. Vale tells him that the situation doesn't change just because he kept his head down, and he is ready to give him as much time as he needs to accept the situation. However, he lets him know that the legitimacy of the firstborn does not disappear unless he dies. After Vale leaves, Adrian maintains the stubborn decision that he is not going to change his mind, no matter how much time he gives him. Adrian's only concern is how he is going to grow his power back to the level where it was before, which is the transcendent level. Because of this, Adrian doesn't think he wants something as trivial as the right of succession to the throne. This was his thought until the banquet that had been coming for a very long time finally arrived, and he was introduced into the hall with every eye staring at him from the balcony. As he walks into the hall, the ladies blush just as he passes by them, talking about how dazzling his appearance is. Adrian can't believe that they are all kicking up such a huge fuss just because he lost some weight. He turns to the other side to watch the supposed nobles of the kingdom, and using his skills, he is able to see their traits. He realizes that all of them possess the trait called the heart of a serpent. This is a brand of evil karma that is accumulated by those who steal from others and trample upon their lives. Adrian is disgusted that they all carry such a filthy trait, but to his surprise, there is only one who doesn't, and this person is Taylor. Adrian excitedly walks over to where Taylor is, and with a bright face, Taylor thanks him for the invitation. Even if Taylor is not competent, he is uncorrupted, and Adrian is fine with people like him, because they are the vessels that will hold the seed he will sow from that moment forward. Just then, the guard starts another announcement to introduce Marquis Montpellier of the Bourgogne Empire, who is attending the banquet as an ambassador. Adrian is shocked when he hears this, and to his surprise, the entire court bow their heads to Montpellier as he shows up on the balcony. Montpellier soon makes his way to where Adrian is, talking about how long it has been since they last saw each other. Adrian, on the other hand, is totally dumbfounded because the empire, Bourgogne, still rings a bell in his head. They are basically the nemesis that he and Leon Burke had to fight against for the longest time in the past. Adrian is boiling inside, and just as he is about to explode, someone suddenly spills wine on him. The man who did this immediately starts to apologize, revealing that he was in a hurry to greet Adrian, which led to him spilling the drink on him. The man stands between Adrian and Montpellier to hide his disgust for the man. Adrian then walks off, saying he has to change his clothes, and the man who spilled the drink apologizes once again, revealing that his body is so old that it barely listens to him again. Carl walks over to Adrian to escort him, and Adrian asks Carl who the old man is. Carl reveals that the man who spilled the drink on him is Marquis Bielefeld. Adrian is relieved to hear this because he has found someone else who is not a rotten noble because, thanks to what he did, his head has actually cooled down. Later on, Vale shows up in Adrian's chambers, saying he heard that there was an incident. He mentions that Bielefeld mentioned that Adrian was about to cause trouble, and judging from the killing intent on Adrian's face, Vale realizes that the Marquis wasn't exaggerating. Vale screams at Adrian, asking him what the hell he was trying to do, but Adrian assures Vale that he is not that reckless. However, there is something that he doesn't understand, and this is the fact that the wicked house of Bourgogne is flaunting its power in the heart of the kingdom. In fact, he noticed that the nobles showed him a sincere respect more than they showed to royalty. Adrian says the relationship is too one-sided to be called allies, and Adrian asks Vale how the kingdom ended up the way it did. Vale then explains to him that it is a special history, revealing that, in the past, the kingdom stood firm against the Empire's numerous invasions, but as time passed, the Empire grew larger, ultimately widening the gap between them. Since the Empire has become a total superpower, the kingdom had no choice but to kneel before them. Adrian is shocked to hear this because, in the past, even though the kingdom was relatively small compared to the Empire, the kingdom had something that allowed them to face the mighty Empire. From the very beginning, the kingdom was founded on martial hymns, but it turns out that they have already lost all of these. Upon seeing this, Adrian tells Vale that he has changed his mind, and Vale asks him what he means by this. Adrian reveals that he has decided to become a king, and Vale is shocked to hear this. Deep down, Adrian knows that he might regret the decision, but he has no choice, since it is something he has to do because he practically built half of the kingdom himself. On the second day of the banquet, Adrian is introduced into the hall alongside Vale, and Adrian notices the disgust and disrespect on the nobles' faces. He cannot believe that they would treat a foreign noble better than him. He remembers that in the past, when his friend stood before the people, no one ever thought he would become king because he was nothing more than a country boy who came running out of some trash village. Nonetheless, Leonberg stepped forward in front of the people just the same way he currently is. Since they won't respect him naturally, Adrian decides to chant a hymn, which is the hymn of the king. Just like the dragon-slaying hymn, the system tells him that his current grade cannot handle the full power of the hymn, so lots of parts have to be omitted, till there is only a quarter left. Even with this, Adrian is able to bear the pain more than the dragon-slaying hymn because it is just a hero-grade hymn, not a myth. In the end, he is able to activate the hymn, which ultimately places an aura crown on his head just like a king, which immediately forces the nobles to bow their heads. Adrian is glad that it worked, and just as he is about to tell them to raise their heads, he feels a strange energy behind him. He turns around and realizes that the strange lady who has been covering her head is a freaking elf. The elf walks up to Adrian, telling him that it is quite surprising that there is still someone who remembers hymns. Adrian freezes up in shock because the lady standing in front of him is not just an ordinary elf. Adrian panics as fear overcomes his body, leaving him to wonder why the mad woman he knows from his past is at the banquet. When people think of elves, they see them as a benevolent race that would never needlessly cause harm to others. But in reality, they are a cruel race that uses their beauty as bait to destroy their opponents. The high elves are born with the hero grade right from birth and are the most dangerous among elves. With the lady elf standing in front of Adrian, Adrian can remember that she is not a regular high elf because she has lived over 1,000 years, which makes her an elder high elf. It turns out that her name is Sigrun, also known as the Dancing Magic Swordswoman. Apparently, she was part of the expedition that slaughtered the Mad Dragon 400 years ago. After this, Sigrun tried to procure Gruhorn, the sword, promising to give him the best life. Because of this, Adrian can never forget her, because she really tormented him. Deep down, Adrian is worried that she might recognize him because of the hymn of the king that he recited. Sigrun then asks Adrian if they have met before, but Adrian quickly shakes his head to say no. Sigrun doesn't want to believe this because she believes that Adrian looks particularly peculiar. Adrian claims that this is his first time seeing an elf with his own eyes, but Sigrun doesn't believe him. Adrian is completely worried about Sigrun because he remembers that back then she was pretty strong, which means she is likely a terrifying monster at that point. Sigrun then tells Adrian that he is lying because when a human sees an elf for the first time, they always have one of two reactions. Most humans get captivated, but humans who have reached a level of martial understanding get edgy. However, in Adrian's case, she is pretty sure that he has not reached a level of martial understanding yet. Adrian argues that he has a unique taste, which is why he appeared to be edgy. Sigrun thinks about it for a minute and decides to withdraw, but she lets Adrian know that it was nice to meet him. After her departure, he heaves a sigh of relief that he survived the ordeal. Later on, the queen gathered women and young ladies from whom Adrian could choose a spouse. There is no age limit for women who are there because there is even a freaking baby and an old lady. The queen, Margarita, notices how displeased Adrian is, and she lets him know that he can't expect to see the type of women that he usually mingles with. Just then, they get word that the elf delegation is requesting an audience, and the queen allows it. Sigrun and her colleagues enter the room, and Sigrun offers her greetings to the queen. Margarita expresses her surprise that Sigrun is there because it's been a long time since elves have visited the kingdom. Sigrun tells the queen that she is aware that she is looking for a woman to become the prince's spouse. Sigrun then informs the queen that she is a high elf, which in human terms means that she is a noble from a house with prestigious lineage. At this point, Adrian is totally confused as he can't understand what Sigrun is trying to do. Sigrun continues by saying her age is not far from Adrian's age. Adrian almost explodes in shock because they are nearly 1,000 years apart and she is able to tell such a shameless lie. She continues by mentioning how elves remain beautiful and the fact that she has those who are loyal to her, just like knights are loyal to their liege. Sigrun then mentions that since the moment she saw Adrian, she felt their fate intertwined. Adrian is shocked when he hears this, since he knows that elves never lie about their fate and connections. This leaves him wondering if she is being sincere. Sigrun's confession leaves the queen and everyone else in the room ultimately shocked, because forming a marriage with elves has never happened. Suddenly, Adrian walks up to Sigrun and grabs her, telling her that they need to talk for a moment. Adrian drags her away from the throne room, leaving the crowd to assume the worst. Adrian takes Sigrun to a private place and he asks her about her true purpose. Sigrun smiles, telling Adrian that she only came to foster friendship between her clan and the kingdom. However, Adrian asks the question again, and this time around he mentions the fact that she is an elder high elf. He continues by saying he is aware of the fact that she is an executioner who has handled her clan's dirty work for hundreds of years, and she is also known as the Blade of the Mistletoe clan. Adrian asks her sternly if she is there for an investigation or the execution of a sentence. Sigrun is surprised when she realizes that Adrian knows about her, and she asks him how he knows this. But Adrian stays mute because he knows that he can't even contend with her at the moment. Since Sigrun was able to feel a sense of fate from him, it means her grade is high enough to catch a glimpse of the past carved into his soul. Sigrun unleashes her aura that covers the entire room, while telling Adrian that he knows who she is, but was foolish enough to stay silent in front of her. Adrian then counters her statement, saying he knows what an executioner is capable of, which is why he can't run his mouth in front of one. Adrian then tells Sigrun to stop with the games, urging her not to interfere with his fate. Adrian knows that everything about Sigrun at that moment is nothing but curiosity towards him, and if kept at the current state of affairs, his fate would be torn to shreds by Sigrun, who is a lunatic elf. Adrian figures out that it would be better if she develops an interest in him instead. Adrian plans to live long enough to become the best dish out there. Sigrun moves closer, asking Adrian who he is, and Adrian replies that at that current moment, he is nothing more than a pitiful prince. Sigrun asks him about the person living inside him, and Adrian tells her that she would have to wait to find out. Sigrun then mentions that she was pretty sure that something was off because there was no way they would have sent her to the kingdom on a trash mission. However, she now knows that it was because of Adrian. Adrian is left stunned, and he realizes that Sigrun has not changed from the creepy woman that she is. Moments later, they return to the hall holding hands, leaving everyone in shock. Adrian then takes Sigrun to his mother, letting her know that there is something he has to say. Adrian shocks everyone when he mentions his plan to be engaged to Sigrun. Deep down, Adrian cannot believe that he has to call Sigrun's name so affectionately. However, he has no choice because at that moment he can't go against what Sigrun wants. Adrian plans to buy himself time, even if it is a little time. The queen is overwhelmed by Adrian's decision, and Adrian tells her that they are not going to decide hastily since it is a really important matter. He assures the queen that he will take his time to observe, and the queen agrees with him, saying this would be the best choice. Adrian knows that during the time of observation, the queen would use it to calculate the value of the engagement. Sigrun, on the other hand, would use the time to prepare her delicacy, which is Adrian. As for Adrian, he plans to use the time to build enough power to escape the creepy and terrifying elf. Later on, Jillian is seen crashing out in his chambers, complaining about how Adrian is so trash, and the only thing he has over him is his birthright. Jillian is raging about the things Adrian has done so far, starting from Vale declaring his support for him and obtaining Arwen as his own personal right. As if all that is not enough, Jillian can't believe that Adrian is going after the elf too, and to put Adrian in his place, he decides that it is his time to duel him just as scheduled. He plans to ruin his golden eggs during the duel because killing him would cause a big fuss. All he wants is to ruin Adrian's function as a man. Just as planned, the duel is organized, and overseeing it is the commander of the Royal Knights, Sturmhilde. He has been given authority by the king to do this, and no one will object to whatever results come out in the end. The commander tells the princes to raise their swords, but Adrian is not really into all the yapping just because of a sparring match. In fact, he is not entirely interested, while Jillian, on the other hand, is boasting about how he wants to disgrace his brother. Because of this, he has even gathered spectators, consisting of nobles. Adrian makes the dude even angrier by telling him that he talks too much, and this gets him hyped up. He absorbs the mana in the environment, telling Adrian that they are about to see if he can still blab the way he is after he has messed him up. Jillian runs toward Adrian, and Adrian initially had plans to toy with him, but he doesn't really have the time. With just a single strike, Adrian cuts Jillian down, ultimately knocking him out completely. The nobles and the commander, in witness, are totally blown away by what just happened in front of them. They don't want to believe that this is the first prince that they have always known, and the commander wastes no time declaring Adrian as the winner since Jillian can't continue the fight. As Adrian walks away from the site, he is utterly disgusted that a bunch of nobles came over just to watch the kids fight. The nobles, on the other hand, still find it hard to believe that the promising Prince Jillian actually lost a fight. It surprises them even more because Adrian has only been practicing for a few months. Later on, Jillian wakes up in his room with plasters all over his head, but the first thing he demands is a rematch. He tells his servants to prepare his gear because he wants a rematch that will decide the victor. However, they let him know that this is not possible because Adrian had already left the capital with Vale immediately after the duel ended. Jillian asks them where he went, and they reveal that he is going to the north, where the Balorhards reside. On their way, Vale commends Adrian, telling him that he has gotten really good at riding, and Adrian boasts about it. Vale immediately regrets his decision to praise the dude because he never shows humility whatsoever. Vale then asks him why he is in such a rush because the banquet has just ended, and it would have been better if he had rested for a few days first. Adrian replies that he has no place in the capital, and he has no interest in trying to convince the trash nobles to be on his side. Adrian believes that soldiers and knights are more suited to him. Vale agrees that they are not as calculating as nobles, but are much more conservative, and Vale asks Adrian if winning the hearts of the knights looks easy to him. Adrian replies that affection between them will obviously grow once they spend time together. Deep down, Adrian knows that he can't waste any time because he will end up marrying Sigrun, and everyone she has taken an interest in the past ultimately met their ruin. Adrian figures out that he needs to get stronger faster, and this cannot happen if he remains in the capital, which is very peaceful. To accelerate his growth and sharpen his sword, the best place is none other than where humans are tested the most, which is the place where the most martial hymns were born, and this is the battlefield. They soon reach a straight path of valleys, and Vale tells him that these valleys are protected by his family. Just then, Adrian complains about the cold, and Vale suggests that he go inside the carriage, but he refuses, saying he has to get used to the cold. Surprisingly, Niccolo followed them, claiming that he wants to see the north because there is a book he is writing, which will help Adrian. Adrian just ignores the old man because he is not ready for his shenanigans, and he notices that Arwen is exceptionally focused. He calls her, asking her if she is fine, and with a bright smile on her face, she assures Adrian that she is good. Adrian tells her that he can switch with her up front if it is too difficult, but Arwen refuses, saying a knight doesn't seek personal comfort. Adrian is glad to hear this because out of all the knights, Arwen is the only one who appears to be full of drive. The other knights are brooding because they were dragged to the harsh region by royal decree. Adrian knows that Karl would have been able to manage them if he were there, but the king didn't allow Karl to follow him, stating that the knights are not his personal use. The king even teases him about the knights he is obtaining for himself, and Adrian understands that the scoundrel prince has done a lot in the past, but he thinks the king is going too far. Nonetheless, he wants to believe that there is still a hidden story that he doesn't know about. Moments later, Vale spots a blizzard descending from the mountain, and he suggests that they pick up the pace before they get caught in it. Before they knew it, the falling snow turned into a blizzard, and their march immediately became so tough that one person couldn't even hear the voice of the person next to them. Seeing how dangerous the situation has become, Vale increases the tempo of his voice using mana, telling the knights to abandon the carriages for that moment because they need to travel light. He orders the men to continue on foot, and Adrian immediately goes to the carriage to help Adelia out. Suddenly, the royal knights start getting thrown apart, and Adrian rushes over to tell them to throw their shields away. In fact, he tells them to dump anything that might weigh them down, saying that they are going to come back for it later. Adrian then orders the biggest guy in the group to take the lead, and the northern knights are surprised when they see Adrian calling out orders because they were already planning to step in. With this, they continue through the harsh weather conditions, and soon afterward, a knight falls behind. Without hesitation, Adrian grabs the knight and puts him on his shoulder, while telling the other knights to get a move on. Just as the group starts to reach the castle, which is their destination, the blizzard suddenly vanishes, revealing the bright sky, making it seem like the group didn't just pass through a hellish storm. Vale walks forward to the castle, and with authority he welcomes Adrian to the Winter Castle, which he lords over. Talking about the Winter Castle, it is a fortress that is located at the northernmost point of the kingdom, and it exists to block the monsters inhabiting the Blade Mountains. The Winter Castle is considered the worst duty station for ordinary soldiers, and they always pray not to go back there again. Even worldly nobles try to weigh the political status of the castle, but those who are born in the castle have recognized it as their lifelong duty and pride. Just then, the gates of the castle open, and Vale's son, Vincent, steps out to hand over command back to his returning father, while he returns to his post as the Ranger Company commander. Vale commends his son, telling him that he has worked hard while the boy is just glad that his dad came back alive. Adrian then cuts in, expressing his shock that his uncle had a son. Vale asks him if he really thinks that at his age, he wouldn't have a son. Adrian piles on the misery, telling Vale that he can actually see that they resemble each other with their stubborn-looking mouth. Vincent takes a moment, and after Adrian is done jesting, he offers his greetings to the first prince. Adrian casually tells him that it is nice to meet him, but deep down, Adrian is raging because he doesn't think a scoundrel like Adrian has a place in the Winter Castle. One of the knights offers to guide Adrian through the castle, but Vincent can't wrap his head around the idea that his father would bring someone like this to the castle. Vincent challenges his father about this, and his father tells him that everything he heard is true because he has decided to become Adrian's guardian. He adds that Adrian will be staying at the castle in the meantime, and Vincent reminds his father that Adrian is the one who was cast aside by the king himself. Vale simply tells his son that people are bound to change, and he tells his son that he has one request for him. He urges him to observe Adrian with no hate in his heart. Later on, they meet for a report on how things have been going in Vale's absence. Vincent mentions that they have been steadily reducing monster settlements, but there are still a few places that have been untouched. He then adds that since his father is around, they would like to move fast. He continues giving his report and soon mentions that the only problem they are encountering is the orcs. Apparently, a small group of less than 20 orcs has settled near the entrance of the mountain range. He mentions that it is going to be difficult to handle these numbers with just the rangers' arrows. Vincent proceeds to say he is currently selecting knights stationed within the castle, and just then, Adrian cuts in, telling Vincent that he would like to take care of the orc problem. Vincent protests, telling him that the orcs of the Blade Mountains are different from ordinary orcs, and if things go wrong, it could cause problems for the rangers' operations. Adrian ignores him and calls his uncle, since he obviously knows that he has a soft spot for him. Vale then asks Vincent if he has confirmed the scale and strength of the orcs. Vincent replies that the current number they have confirmed so far is a maximum of 20, but the presence of orc warriors or orc shamans has not been confirmed, so they cannot conclude that there are none. Vale then turns to Adrian, asking him if he is confident, and Vincent quickly cuts in, screaming out his father's name. He mentions that the mountain entrance is one of the main paths used by the rangers, and if something goes wrong, which escalates it into a battlefield with the orcs, future operations will immediately become twice as difficult. In addition, if something happens to Adrian, their family is screwed, and deep down, Adrian is actually impressed that Vale raised his son to be smart. Vale ignores his son's protest and asks Adrian what he needs. Adrian mentions that he needs about 3 guides, and he wants them to change his guard's equipment too. Vale tells Adrian that all of these are not difficult, so he is going to do it, ultimately shocking Vincent down to his bones. Moments later, Adrian meets up with the royal guards with him, telling them that they have a mission. The captain is shocked to hear this, and he asks Adrian what he means by this. Adrian tells the dude that they have received a mission to subjugate orcs. He reveals that the enemy numbers are 20, and there may or may not be orc warriors or shamans. The dude asks Adrian why they have to be the ones to do this, since they are just his escorts and it is the 3rd Legion's work. Adrian uses his words against him, telling him that he also has to follow him to protect him. As Adrian walks away, he tells the guards that the 3rd Legion will contact them later, so they are to collect equipment and report to him. Even though Adrian might not like the soldiers, he plans to make them useful, since they are the soldiers who were given to him by his father. Even though they were completely useless in the blizzard, Adrian can still see that their stats are decent, since they are elites selected by the royal family. However, Adrian notices that a redhead among them has a certain trait called disguise, which leaves him wondering what the dude is up to. When it is time for Adrian to leave, he is shocked to learn that Vincent is the guide. Vincent tells Adrian that the consequences of the mission failing would be too much, so they can't risk it. Adrian tells Vincent that he and his men won't fail, but Vincent is not about to take his word for it. Adrian tries to use the judgment authority on Vincent, but he fails, leaving him to wonder if the dude is already a triple chain knight. He also notices that among all the supposed rangers that Vincent is taking with him, only one is a real ranger, while the rest are capable knights pretending to be rangers. Adrian realizes that they have plans to handle everything just in case things go horribly wrong. Adrian decides not to make an issue of this for that one time. As they prepare to leave, Adrian tells Adelia that he won't be taking her along because he knows that it is going to be a big problem if her trait blooms the wrong way. As they walk through the snowy forest, Vincent tells Adrian and his group that they have to walk while conserving as much stamina as possible because if their stamina drops, their hands and feet will stiffen, which will prevent combat from flowing smoothly. He continues talking about things they need to know, and Adrian wishes he could just roll off and die because his nagging is worse than his father's. Moments later, a rabbit runs past them, and one of the rangers uses his telescope to scout the distance. He informs the team that there is a group of orcs ahead, and he asks Adrian how he plans to proceed. Adrian then orders his guards to load their bows, while the rest of the group prepares themselves. Adrian walks forward, and the moment one of the orcs sees him, he gets agitated. Adrian lets off an evil smile because it's been a long time since he saw a monster face to face. The orc tries to be the hero as he stands tall in front of his comrades, but Adrian orders the bowman to fire, and the arrows from the bow ultimately take down the orc. Adrian also whips out his sword as everything is about to descend into chaos. Adrian looks alive as he leaps toward the orc with a smile on his face. He takes down the orc in one swing, and as the orc's blood soaks the snow, Adrian realizes what he has been missing and craving all this time. He stares at the rest of the orc, and he is exhilarated just by breathing in the air of the battlefield. Arwen fears for Adrian's safety, but Adrian screams at her not to come any closer because she might just get swept up in the hell he is about to unleash on the orcs. The whole tale goes back 400 years ago when orcs were not monsters, but one of the proud masters of the continent. It is not a myth nor about a hero, but it is about an individual who couldn't leave his name in history, and this is the hymn of a pitiful man who really hated orcs. He was a sorrowful father who fought and fought until his strength ran out, ultimately piling up enough green corpses to raise a mountain, which is the fleeting verses of an extraordinary avenger. The moment he recites these verses, the system recognizes it as a hymn of revenge, and a red, overwhelming aura swells around his body. Before coming to the north, the redhead who had the disguise trait had met up with the Count of the Royal Court, who bribed him to report everything the prince does when he is up north. They believed that Adrian would be holed up in the castle while claiming other men's achievements for himself. But now that the dude is on the battlefield, he is totally horrified by what Adrian is doing to the orcs. The dude is so stunned that he finds it hard to move, and even holding his weapon right becomes a problem. By the time he gathers a little bit of strength to move, an orc ruins his confidence by easily grabbing his spear. The dude shits his pants, believing that he is done for, but Arwen comes to his rescue, cutting off the orc's arm before taking its head. The dude crashes to the ground in fear as the orc's arm holding his spear crashes into his front. Arwen turns to him, telling him that he is on a battlefield, and he is not supposed to lose his weapon. With fear written all over him, he acknowledges Arwen's advice, and Arwen takes command of the royal guards as they prepare for battle against the orcs. Deep down, Arwen knows that the orcs have the numbers, and it is going to be difficult for them to handle the orcs with their current numbers. Suddenly, she feels something strange in the distance, and before the troops know it, the orc standing in front of them gets cut down by Adrian's immaculate attack, spilling blood everywhere. Adrian's swelling with a terrifying aura, and Arwen can smell his bloodlust. She calls out his name, but he ignores her and dashes toward the orc's position. As he cuts down the orcs, he remembers the Avenger in the past, who took down many orcs, but it was never enough. The Avenger continued seeking the blood of his enemy, causing him to wander the barren lands ruled by orcs, while leaving loads of orc corpses in his wake. Even though at some point the mana in his heart ran out, he didn't stop. He continued drinking orc blood and chewing on their flesh with his sword. However, with every step he took, he got more frail, but the demonic sword he was wielding, which was Gruhorn, continued to sustain him. Gruhorn burned his remaining life force for his final wish. It turns out that he started the whole revenge quest for his wife and daughter, who were killed by the orcs. In the end, he finally met his lifelong enemy, the king of the orcs. But at this point, he was nothing more than a shadow of his old self. Even though he didn't have the strength he initially possessed, he still dashed toward the terrifying enemy. He leaps toward the giant orc, but he easily grabs him and crushes him with his giant hands. No miracle came to save him, but even with his dying breath, he still didn't give up. He looks into the king's eyes with no one present to know or tell his story except his demonic sword, Gruhorn, who witnessed everything. Now in the present day, as Adrian stands in the middle of orc corpses, he realizes that he is the only one who remembers the man's pain. Adrian takes a moment to breathe and realizes that the knights are trying their best to hold off the orcs. This is when it suddenly dawns on him that the hymn of vengeance is not yet complete, and his heart lights up with bloodlust yet again. Adrian realizes that it is left to him to finish the hymn, and he doesn't hesitate as he runs through the orcs, cutting through them like butter. Adrian looks like a super monster when compared to the orcs, as his eyes turn red with the smell of blood taking over the battlefield. Moments later, the system informs him that a new verse has been added to the hymn of vengeance. Adrian has basically piled up a huge number of corpses to make a mountain while their blood runs under like a pool, and by this, Adrian is able to change the hymn of vengeance to the hymn of requiems. With the last of the orcs dead, Vincent walks up to the orcs' banner, and he breaks it to signify that the orcs have been annihilated. He raises the red banner and screams out victory, and the rest of the knights join him in shouting victory. Adrian then takes the opportunity to look closely at Vincent, who is the heir of a family that is devoted to waging war against monsters. Coincidentally, he bears the same name as the Avenger who put his life on the line just for the sole purpose of annihilating the orcs. It turns out that the Avenger had sworn with his last breath to return, and Adrian wonders if the Avenger of the past is now Vincent. Vincent then walks up to Adrian, and Adrian asks him what the issue might be. Vincent then tells Adrian to take the banner because it belongs to the soldier who fought the bravest. Vincent mentions that it is a tradition practiced by the 3rd Legion, making it an honorable trophy of victory that cannot be traded for anything. With all indications, Vincent lets him know that the banner belongs to him. Just then, Arwen calls his name, and she holds her hand to her chest while paying her respects to Adrian. Suddenly, the others go down on their knees, offering their respects to Adrian for his bravery. Adrian is blown away by this, and just as he is about to make the declaration of victory, Vincent urges him to say it louder so that everyone can hear it. Adrian takes in a deep breath with a proud smile on his face as he screams out, declaring their victory. The knights follow in support while hailing him. Adrian is totally blown away by the taste of victory, and he starts to brag, talking about how he is the owner of the banner. He is in the middle of this when Vincent cuts in, telling him that he has 16 banners, but Adrian doesn't really care since the current banner belongs to him. Vincent scoffs and immediately remembers why he didn't like the brat in the first place. Later on, they organize a funeral ceremony for those who died by burning their bodies. During the procession, Vincent tells Adrian that the casualties are not necessarily high for a battle that was against an elite orc combat. Adrian is not entirely relieved by this, and Arwen adds that the whole situation is tragic. Vincent then cuts in, saying victory is enough mourning and tribute for the fallen because comforting the spirits of the fallen with the blood of orcs is the Balorhard way. Adrian stares intently at Vincent, realizing that he and the dude from the past have a lot of similar things down to their names. He wonders if Vale's son is the reincarnation of the Avenger. Adrian then notices the number of troops on site, and he asks Vincent if this large number of troops initially followed them from the castle. Vincent turns his head away as he lies about how a ranger unit was passing by, so they joined them. Adrian obviously knows that he is lying, and he teases him about how convenient a coincidence it is. Deep down, Adrian knows that Vincent didn't trust him at all, which is why he prepared the rangers quietly. Vincent then mentions that it is a mystery why an orc combat unit came down that far to the foot of the hill. He adds that it is also strange that none of the rangers detected the combat unit's movement, and he suggests that they hurry back to the castle. Soon afterward, they return to the castle, and they are welcomed by Vale himself. He is still in the midst of congratulating them when Adrian raises his banner to brag about it. The soldiers who are back at the castle are blown away that Adrian claimed a banner for himself on his first deployment. The royal guards, on the other hand, are already tired of hearing him brag about it because it is the 11th time already. Vincent ignores him and just walks up to his father to tell him that there were suspicious signs on the mountains. Vincent lets him know that an orc combat unit showed up very early on, and they were right next to the scouts. Vale believes that they might have found a large prey, or maybe something happened deep within the mountains, but he knows that neither is a good sign. Even though he would have preferred that his son rest a bit, he tells him to follow him because it is a matter of urgency. As he walks away, Vincent commends Adrian, telling him that he worked hard. Just then, Adelia rushes out to meet her master, and she expresses her joy that Adrian returned safely. She talks about how worried she was because she didn't know if Adrian was safe or not. Adelia hasn't even finished greeting him when he brings out the banner to show her. Later that night, Vincent shows up in Adrian's room to tell him that within a few days, a ranger unit will be reassembled to scout the situation in the mountains, and they have no way of knowing what variables may exist within the mountains. Vincent says they plan to select only elites capable of professionally scouting the mountains, which means Adrian would not be needed for the mission. Adrian shocks him when he tells him that he has no interest in the mission. Adrian then asks him why he came all the way to his room to tell him the details of the meeting, and Vincent mentions that Vale was the one who ordered him to. Adrian immediately figures out that Vale wants them to get along well, and Adrian doesn't have an issue with this. Adrian tells Vincent that he can leave, and surprisingly, Adrian still has the banner on his table so he can stare at it all day. Adrian takes a moment to think about the battle, and he realizes that he was completely immersed. He believes that it is because it was the first time he had fully recited an old martial hymn without missing a single verse. He is convinced that he will experience similar things like that from that moment forward. Since not all the martial hymns are fully his own, Adrian plans to change everything up and make everything completely his, just like he made the Hymn of Vengeance into the Hymn of Requiems. Suddenly, a strange bird shows up by the window, and without looking too long, he figures out that it is no ordinary bird. Just from how weird the bird is, Adrian already knows who sent it, and it is none other than Sigrun. Sigrun communicates with him via the bird, asking him if he likes the gift that she sent. It immediately dawns on Adrian that Sigrun was the one who made the orc combat unit appear at the foot of the mountain. Sigrun tells Adrian that all she cares about is for Adrian to face opponents that are suited to his level. Sigrun hopes that Adrian would take the gift with all sincerity, but Adrian can't believe that she just sent dozens of rangers to their death, and she is shamelessly talking about some stupid gift. It turns out that the elf race are severe spectators, and Adrian believes that Sigrun must have had a good time watching him fight the orc combat unit that she intentionally set loose on them. Sigrun admits that she was blown away by the hymn of hatred that was directed at the entire orc clan, and to her, what she did was goodwill. Adrian is tired of hearing her babble, and he suggests that she go straight to the point. Sigrun complains about how cold Adrian is, but lets him know that she is ready to wait until the day he opens his heart for her. The bird then makes it move, as it lands on Adrian's arm, and Sigrun tells Adrian that deep within the mountains, there is something that Adrian needs. She mentions that it is an ancient existence that is currently slumbering within the mountains. Sigrun assures Adrian that if he uses it as his lyrics, it is definitely going to become a truly wonderful hymn. Adrian immediately becomes interested in what Sigrun is saying, but Sigrun lets him know that the bird has reached the end of its time. Just as she finishes saying this, the bird explodes, splattering blood and gore all over his face and body. Adrian watches in horror and realizes that Sigrun intentionally did it to displease him. In addition, he knows what Sigrun wants from him, and this is the fact that she wants him to write a new martial hymn. Apparently, elves can recite hymns, but can't generate them. Basically, they weave the hymns of others into their own melodies and sing through their sword dances. Sigrun giving him that information is most likely for the sake of obtaining a hymn with a deeper flavor through Adrian. Nonetheless, Adrian is willing to play along even if it's just that once. Later on, Adrian talks to Vincent about this, and Vincent tells him that they don't go deep into the mountains. He mentions that they only move around the edges because everyone who has gone into the inner mountains has never made it out alive. Adrian is shocked to hear this, forcing him to ask again, and Vincent lets him know that no one has made it out in the past. Vincent says it is their mission to block monsters from coming down the mountains, not to explore them. Adrian immediately figures out that no one knows what is inside the inner mountains. Adrian figures out that basically all the mysteries and wonders of the world were depleted in the past because of knights who scoured the whole world to reach the divine top. However, it remains a mystery that such a forbidden zone still remained after this. Adrian smiles because he can see that coming to Balerhard was the best choice. Vincent then tells Adrian not to think of going deep into the mountains, and Adrian assures him that he won't go, yet. Later on, Adrian is cleaning his sword while thinking about what might be inside the mountain. He is tempted to rush to the mountain, but he knows that it is not yet time, so he needs more battles and more victories. However, he is not entirely worried because the Winter Castle is a place where battles happen frequently. He hasn't finished thinking about this when the alarm goes off, warning of another attack. The men are ordered to immediately set up positions on the wall, and Adrian rushes over to where Vale is. Vale tells him to look into the distance, and when he does, he sees 3 rangers dashing towards the castle, leaving him to wonder what they are running from. The men on the wall urge them to run faster, but what is chasing them soon emerges behind, and it turns out to be orcs riding on wolves' backs. The men on the wall can't help the running rangers because they are still out of bow range. The rangers keep trying to reach the castle, but Adrian figures out that something is off. Vale confirms this, saying the orcs are toying with the rangers because there is no way the wolf riders couldn't close the little gap between them. Just then, the captain of the fleeing unit decides to buy his men some time. He turns around to face the orcs while telling his men to run ahead. His bravery is quickly met with a horrible death from one of the wolves that tears him apart. Even his unit members who decided to fight alongside him got captured. Vincent is about to jump off the wall, but Adrian stops him. He lets him know that the orcs are not trying to do an execution because what they are currently doing is challenging them to a duel. The captain of the orc squad slams his banner into the ground, and it has a skull on it to send fear into the enemy's body. When Adrian sees this, he immediately figures out what resides in the inner mountains, and it is the orc king. The orc captain screams out in orc language, demanding that they fight an honorable battle because he plans to reclaim the name of his legion for his great king. Vale asks Adrian if he is sure that the orcs want a duel with hostages on the line, and Adrian says yes. However, the expression on Vale and Vincent's faces shows that they don't believe him. Since they are not ready to believe him, he decides to show them. Adrian walks forward, and he replies to the orc captain in orc language, telling him that he accepts his duel. Adrian tells the captain that everyone, but the duelists, should take 200 steps back, and they are to dismount their wolves. The orc captain is shocked by the way Adrian is speaking to him fluently, and he asks him how a human knows the language of their tribe. He asks Adrian if he is carrying the blood of their tribe, but Adrian assures him that there is no such thing. Adrian screams at him, asking him if he is good with the terms or not. The captain then tells Adrian that they are going to do as he says, but he lets him know that he is not going to let it slide if they tarnish the honorable duel. After he is done negotiating with the orc captain, Adrian turns to Vincent and Vale, asking them if they now believe him. Vale looks at him scornfully, telling him that he has just been spouting nonsense. He hasn't finished saying this when they see the orcs' vanguard moving backwards just as Adrian demanded, leaving only 5 orcs that want to participate in the duel. Vale is completely shocked by this, as he reveals that he has spent dozens of winters at the castle, but this is the first time he will see orcs willingly retreating. Adrian then tells Vale to save his shock for later, because the orcs have a simple demand. They want 5 participants in the duel, but they must be selected only from those who participated in the previous battle in the mountains. Vale is surprised to hear that they want warriors from the battle where they encountered the orc combat unit at the foot of the mountain not long ago. Vale then calls on his son, and in no time warriors from the previous battle start to volunteer, but Adrian urges them to slow down because 2 spots are already filled. The Rangers are shocked to hear this, and they remind Adrian that it is dangerous, but Adrian tells them that he is the only one who can communicate with the orcs. The Rangers beg Adrian to at least leave 1 spot for them, but Adrian refuses because he can't deny Arwen the opportunity to take on the orcs when she is already eager to do so. Adrian asks Arwen if she is up to the task, and she bows to Adrian, assuring him that she is. Vale then asks Adrian where he learned the language of the orcs, because this is the first time he is going to find out that the orcs can even communicate. Adrian quickly lies about it, saying it is all thanks to studying. Adrian can figure out the expression on Vale's face, and he urges him not to think that words could have resolved the past incidents because this is a special case. Basically, only the orc nobles who serve the king of their tribe can speak the ancient language, just like the orc captain. The captain screams at Adrian, asking him if he is coming, and he assures him that he is. Adrian is not one to believe in many coincidences because the moment he stepped into the world, an elf ambassador visited the kingdom for the first time in ages, and in the north, the king of the orcs revealed himself for the first time in 400 years. The gates are lowered, and the 5 duelists from the human side step outside the castle. Even though Adrian is curious about whatever is going on, he doesn't think it is the right time for him to think about it because it is the time to fight. As Adrian stands in front of the orc asks him if he is his opponent, and Adrian says yes, while asking him if he doesn't like what he sees. However, the orc says this is not the case because his spirit is the greatest among the humans standing before him, so he is a worthy opponent. The orc tells Adrian that his flesh and blood will be a good delicacy, and Adrian bows his head as he prepares to fight. He talks about how funny it is that the first opponent to acknowledge him without any hate is a freaking orc. Vincent screams at Adrian, telling him that the orc captain is too much for him, so he should be the one to handle it. He is in the middle of this when one of the orcs swings at him, almost slashing him, but he leaps out of the way. Just then, the rest of the orcs stare down on the humans as they prepare to engage them in a fight. Adrian tells his comrades that orcs don't take turns in duels like knights, and he urges everyone to survive on their own. The whole situation immediately descends into chaos as the 2 sides charge at each other. Adrian leaps toward the orc captain and tries to attack from above, but the orc captain blocks his attack and repels him with his large axe. The orc berates Adrian, telling him that he is pretty weak compared to the strength that he showed, but Adrian decides to get serious, and he tells the orc captain that they are about to see if he is right or wrong. Adrian's aura ultimately shoots through the roof as it is fueled by the resentment of the hundreds of rangers and the Avenger who wandered the plains. Adrian smiles as he is running riot with an overwhelming strength, and he declares once again that coming to the Winter Castle is the best decision. After he is done gathering his mana, Adrian thanks the noble orc for waiting, and he immediately activates the Hymn of Requiems, which makes Adrian look like a horror figure in the presence of the orcs. As the fight progresses, Vincent finds himself struggling against the orcs, which leaves him totally confused, as he has never heard of orcs using coordinated teamwork in the past. In addition, he is left in awe of the orc leader, who has immense strength. At the same time, he is impressed with the fact that Adrian has enough strength to push back the terrifying orc. Adrian soon gets under the orc's skin after minutes of fighting him, telling him that he is pretty weak for someone who calls himself a servant of the king. This works as he wants, and the orc lunges toward Adrian with an overwhelming aura, aiming to cut down his head. However, Adrian blocks the attack and unleashes a massive force that shatters the orc's weapon, shocking him down to his bones. This, in turn, leaves the annoying orc completely open for Adrian to cut off his right arm and leg, leaving the orc in a world of pain. The orc screams out in agony, staring at his severed limbs as blood gushes out uncontrollably while his comrades look around in fear. Adrian then walks up to the orc and pushes his sword into his head to finish him off and end the battle. Just as he does this, Adrian feels an overwhelming presence staring at him. He looks in the direction of where the scary aura is coming from, and he immediately figures out that the sensation is coming from the ancient existence said to live beyond the mountains. Arwen is rushing over to Adrian when he yells at her not to come any closer. In the far distance of the mountain range is a red presence that sends shivers down everyone's spines. Suddenly, something huge appears in the distance and travels toward Adrian with incredible force. It turns out to be a large spear, and with the speed of the spear, Adrian realizes that he no longer has the time to dodge, so he has to put everything he has into blocking the attack. Adrian quickly gets into a defensive position to parry the attack, but he soon realizes that the spear commands so much force that his current strength is nothing. Adrian pushes out all of his energy to parry the spear, and he successfully gets it out of the way. However, the force of the spear is so great that it still struck the castle wall to leave a huge dent in it. The soldiers and knights are left in complete awe, but it soon dawns on them that they have to check on Adrian. Arwen rushes to the point of impact where Adrian is buried under the snow thanks to the shockwave from the spear. She quickly claws away snow to check Adrian's pulse, and fear grips her when she realizes that she can't feel his pulse. She shakes Adrian, urging him to open his eyes, but Adrian is out cold, and Arwen's senses tell her that she has to find a way to restore Adrian's breathing. Arwen then proceeds to carry out CPR on Adrian, inadvertently giving him his first kiss. Adrian jerks back to life and he coughs up blood, which even stains Arwen's mouth. Arwen heaves a sigh of relief as Adrian starts breathing again, and seeing Adrian in his moment of vulnerability, Arwen realizes just how young and small he is. Before she gets to spend more time with the prince, Vincent comes rushing over to check on Adrian too. Adrian gently calls on Arwen, expressing his anger about the orcs not honoring their deal. At this point, Adrian has come to the conclusion that the only good orc is a dead orc. Adrian then tells Arwen to finish off the rest of the orcs. Vincent asks Arwen what Adrian's orders are, and she tells him with ferocity that the prince has ordered them to finish the duel. Vincent agrees with her, and he passes on the order to his comrades, who descend on the orcs without mercy. Later on, Adrian wakes up in his room with anger, screaming out the orcs' names. Vincent and the others are in the room, and Vincent asks him if he is fine. Adrian confesses that his whole body aches, but he is even more frustrated that he was overpowered by a single spear thrown from far away. Vincent and the knights bow to Adrian, telling him that it was thanks to him that they were able to save their allies on the ground, whom they had initially given up on. Adrian nervously acknowledges the gratitude, but he wishes that the dude would just stop acting cringe. Vincent then tells Adrian that while he was unconscious, an orc army set up a camp 1 kilometer away from the castle. Vincent assures Adrian that the orc force is something that they can fend off. Vincent then leaves the boring conversation aside to ask Adrian what the giant spear is, and he is also curious about the roar from the mountains. Adrian then drops the bombshell, telling them that the orc responsible for this is a king. He mentions that a king who is going to unite all the orcs within the mountain range has just been born. The knights are confused when they hear this, since it is quite impossible for the orcs to have a king. It is basically in their nature to challenge their chieftain whenever they feel bored, and Adrian asks Vincent if he knows what they call the king of orcs. Vincent asks him if there is a specific title, and Adrian says yes. Adrian voices the king's eulogy, talking about how he destroys and tramples, and his only goal is to finally conquer everything because he is nothing but a greedy being. Adrian mentions that the king has a title, and it is called the Warlord. Before Adrian knows it, they turn his room into a strategy room, talking about how they plan to approach the orcs that are crawling around. Adrian soon gets tired, and he screams at them, asking them why they are all making a fuss in his room when there is a perfectly good meeting room for them to use. The knights then tell Adrian that there is something that they need him to help clarify, since it is their first time hearing about the king of the orcs. Before Adrian knows it, a bunch of files are slapped onto his face with a request that he should check them out. Adrian almost groans out in frustration because of how annoying the knights are. After a tiresome day, Vincent and the others finally leave Adrian to get some rest, and he crashes into his bed in exhaustion. Since Vale is the only one left in the room, Adrian asks him if he has anything to say, and Vale demands to know if what he showed him earlier is the power of the martial hymn that he mentioned. Vale is curious to know about the power of the blue flames, which displayed a destructive force that is far superior to mana reserves. Adrian tells him that it was, and he asks him about his thoughts after seeing the power. Vale finds it hard to give an answer, and Adrian figures out that he is most likely confused about what to say, since he is someone who preached against the power of the mana heart. Adrian knows Vale must have realized he can only attain the power by totally abandoning the beliefs he's held his entire life. Vale then asks Adrian if the power can also be used by those who utilize the mana chain. Adrian takes a deep breath before answering, teasing Vale for being the greedy one. He reminds him that he has a faster and more stable way of accumulating mana, but he wants to covet the martial hymns too. Adrian then reveals that reaching transcendence through martial hymns is a privilege strictly reserved for those who utilize mana hearts, so it is not allowed for the Knights of the Ring. Vale then goes further by saying he is pretty sure that Adrian has a reason for trying to teach him about the power of martial hymns. Adrian smiles and thinks to himself just how much Vale ignored him at first, but he is now showing so much interest. Adrian gets up from the bed and asks Vale if he knows that elves are crazy about the martial hymns. He reveals that since elves themselves cannot compose hymns, they borrow and use the martial hymns of others. Using this analogy, Adrian tells Vale that it might be impossible for him to personally compose and voice a hymn, but he believes that it is possible for him to recite it. Adrian tells Vale that it might not be a mana heart, but he reminds him that he already has something that he has trained for his whole life. He mentions that mana rings have the property of resonating with one another, so they just might become an excellent instrument. However, the possibility of this is what Adrian doesn't know if it is feasible. Basically, discovering a new path will be left for the Knights of the Ring themselves. Before he knows it, another round of meetings begins in his room. He later goes to sleep, and after a resounding rest, he wakes up to see Adelia beside him. He asks her where Vale is, and she replies that he left when he was sleeping. Adrian asks her if there was anything that seemed like a change in his uncle, and Adelia replies that she can't particularly say. Adrian takes the cup of water from Adelia's hand, while wondering if his uncle was not able to gain any special enlightenment after thinking about the whole thing for a while. Moments later, Vale enters the room, and Adrian immediately notices the changes in him. He could sense the aura radiating from his uncle, which depicts the fact that he is a sword master. Adrian smiles when he realizes that his uncle has finally possessed a soul that is worthy of his body. Vale bows to Adrian, thanking him for opening his eyes to the light. Adrian smiles while teasing his uncle, and Vale asks him if he is sulking, but Adrian refutes this. He has no reason to sulk, since he was a sword of high standard that no one even dared to challenge 4 decades ago, but at the moment, he is nothing but a sword expert who can't even look up to a sword master. Adrian assures his uncle that he is not even jealous whatsoever. Vale smiles, saying it must have been an assumption, but deep down, Adrian can't believe just how annoying the dude is. Adrian then asks his uncle to tell him what it is that he has gained, and Vale reveals that he hasn't fully understood the reciting that Adrian mentioned just yet, but he has managed to set a faint guideline in his mind. Vale mentions that he has plans to head toward the king of the orcs. Adrian quickly calls his uncle to order, telling him that he will be the one to face the king of the orcs, so he should just take his mind off of him. Vale smiles, telling his nephew that he is free to do whatever he wants. Later on, the two step out, and Vale tells Adrian that he has so many things that he would like to ask him, but he won't. And one of them is just how Adrian got to be so knowledgeable about orcs. In addition, he is curious to know where his nephew got the information about the orcs. Vale mentions that he is sure that Adrian will tell him when the time finally comes. Suddenly, a scout screams at the top of his voice to warn the castle, telling them that the orc army is approaching and they number about 1,000 or even more. After a closer observation, they realize that the orc army is in the thousands. The soldiers prepare for an attack, and the archers get their bows and arrows ready for battle. Just then, the castle is hit with an overwhelming aura from an orc standing behind the army. Vale is completely blown away by the fighting spirit that he just witnessed, and he asks Adrian if this is the warlord, but Adrian says no. Adrian tells him that the scary orc that they are looking at is merely the warlord's vanguard, so he is one of the ferocious orcs serving the king. Adrian calls the dude a general and also a nightmare to knights and swordmasters, who is known as the Night Slayer. Adrian explains that just like how knights use mana, orcs make use of fighting spirit, and to obtain a more powerful fighting spirit, orcs engage in more battles while making sure they are slaughtering countless enemies. However, there are rare situations where there are mutant orcs that are born with an overwhelming fighting spirit right from birth, and they are more sensitive to fighting spirit and bloodlust than anyone else. In addition, they are able to see intangible energy with their eyes, and orcs call this ability the open eye ability, which they absolutely revere. Adrian lets Vale know that the Night Slayer is a born commander, and even though he might not know tactics or strategy, he knows how to break the enemy better than anyone else because his eyes see everything, including where the enemy's weaknesses are located. Vale admits that Adrian has never been wrong, but he decides that he has to confirm for himself whether the orc is worth being called the Night Slayer or not. Vale grabs a spear and he hurls it at the Night Slayer's position. Surprisingly, the Night Slayer easily deflects the spear, shocking the knights. Even Vale can confirm with this that the Night Slayer is not an enemy to be toyed with, and just then, the Night Slayer throws the spear back to Vale. Vale slightly moves his head, and he also catches the spear just as easily. Vale then mentions that he might not notice anything else, but he can clearly see that the Night Slayer has a personality that refuses to lose. Vale asks Adrian if he knows how to deal with the Night Slayer, and Adrian asks him why he would assume this. Vale lets him know that the excitement is written all over his face. Adrian finally decides to reveal what he knows, and he mentions that all of the Night Slayer's judgments rely solely on the open eye ability, but just as they know, things are not always as they seem. He adds that the Night Slayer might appear to be patient, but in the end, he is still an orc, and if he is baited in the right way, he will not be able to resist pouncing. Later on, Adrian reveals his plan and Vincent argues with him about how dangerous the plan is, but Adrian tries to let him know that stupid tricks won't work on the Night Slayer. Adrian points to Vincent, telling him that he, the Rangers, and even the Knights of the Winter Castle are not going to be part of the bait because they are not going to look very tasty in the Night Slayer's eyes. However, leaving it to the rookies also means that they are going to be breached before they get the chance to react. Adrian proudly points to his team, which is made up of Adelia and Arwen, claiming that it is the best. He mentions that they have elite training, but the only thing they lack is real combat experience. Adrian assures Vincent that once they take out the Night Slayer, everything else will be easy. Vincent still doesn't think Adrian has to act as bait because the castle can successfully fend off the orcs without coming up with such a dangerous plan. Vincent reminds Adrian that his arm is not even healed yet, but Adrian tries to convince him that he is healed by swinging his arm. Deep down, Adrian can still feel a bit of pain in his arm, but he believes that before the battle begins, he will be able to move it better. Adrian then urges Vincent to think logically because the real enemy is not even the Night Slayer. He mentions that as they are busy arguing and wasting time, the King of the Orcs is slowly gaining on them. Adrian assures Vincent that if they fail to end the battle as quickly as they can, Winter Castle is going to fall in the next battle. Adrian tells Vincent that the troop deployment will return to normal if the Night Slayer does not move within this time period. At the same time, Adrian has plans for Adelia, whom he considers his secret weapon. Once everyone is on board, Vale gathers his men to inform them that their goal is not to wipe out the orcs, but to draw out their commander, so they have to stall as long as possible until he shows himself. Rangers and knights have all been stationed on the walls of the castle with their respective instructions. Once they are ready, Vale orders the archers to fire, and the archers let loose their arrows, raining down weapons on the orcs. Some of the orcs are pierced by the arrows, and those who survived the first wave immediately whip out shields that once belonged to Balerhard soldiers. The rangers on the wall see this, and get even angrier that the orcs have the audacity to hold the shields that belong to their fallen. Vale immediately orders his men to intensify the rain of arrows on the orcs, and the archers gladly oblige. Not long after this, the orcs make their way to the wall, and they put up a ladder to help them scale the wall. However, the knights are prepared for this, and Arwen leads the charge to cut down whichever orc gets close. Arwen stands tall on the wall, telling the knights to push down any orc that tries to gain access to the wall. Some of the orcs even try to use ropes to gain access, but the knights cut them off, causing the orcs to crash down the steep wall. The knights also make use of catapults to deal more damage to the annoying orcs. After hours of fighting, the orcs appear to be increasing instead of decreasing in numbers, and the knights are already feeling the pressure. The knights complain about how much they have sacrificed, and the Night Slayer hasn't even shown himself. Adrian, on the other hand, is not worried because this is exactly what he is waiting for. He knows that the knights are already exhausted, and the Night Slayer must have realized this by now. Just as expected, the Wolf Riders make the first charge, and Adrian tells Arwen to handle this set of orcs. Arwen gladly accepts, and Adrian prepares to unleash the final part of the plan, which is the real bait. He pulls out his sword and unleashes his aura, which immediately resonates with the Night Slayer's fighting spirit. The energy travels from far away, where the orc is, and hits the wall to let everyone know that they are up against a menacing opponent. The Night Slayer roars in anger and finally makes the charge alongside his fellow orc. With the Night Slayer rushing at them, the Rangers become proactive, firing arrows repeatedly in his path. The Night Slayer practically uses his own kin as a body shield to continue his advance. The Night Slayer evades all the arrows while running towards the west wall where Adrian is located. The knights fear for Adrian's safety, but Adrian remains calm as he maintains his aura. He urges the Night Slayer to come to him. The Night Slayer angrily grabs the ladder and climbs up with an insane bloodlust. As the Night Slayer closes down on them, Adrian urges Arwen to stick to the plan, and Arwen acknowledges this. Adrian then tells everyone else to make sure they step back from the wall. Not long after this, the Night Slayer finally shows his face on the wall and lets Adrian know that his aura has been recognized. In fact, there is a death order on him from the king. Adrian smiles as he considers this flattering enough because this basically means the Night Slayer won't be running from him. The Night Slayer swings at Adrian, but he blocks the attack with his sword, leaving a reverberating effect that pushes Adrian backwards. Adrian gets back on his feet and dashes toward the Night Slayer with incredible speed. He is able to change his sword hands quickly enough to cut the orc's arm. The Night Slayer mocks Adrian, telling him that a little cut like that won't do anything to him, so he urges him to put everything on the line and fight with honor. Adrian unleashes more aura from his body to stand toe-to-toe with the Night Slayer, but this only amuses the Night Slayer further. Once Adrian realizes that he's gotten the orc's full attention, Adrian gives the signal for the next item on the plan. Suddenly, a huge rope cage falls on the Night Slayer, and the knights start pulling him. The Night Slayer is completely defenseless against whatever Adrian wants to do, and the Night Slayer berates Adrian for fighting without honor. Adrian goes after the Night Slayer, forcing it to lose balance, giving the knights the chance to properly pull the Night Slayer into the main yard behind the wall. Adrian commends Arwen for the good job, and he tells her to fall back immediately. Adrian jumps down to where the Night Slayer is being held, but the knights are barely holding on because of how strong the orc is. Adrian then walks up to the restrained orc to mock him, telling him that he finally looks like an orc. This infuriates the Night Slayer, and he breaks out with force before sending a powerful punch toward Adrian. The punch leaves a devastating shockwave, but when the dust clears, it turns out that Vale had protected Adrian by blocking the strike. Vale talks down on the Night Slayer, telling him that he looks really hideous. Vale then tells Adrian that he is going to take over from where he left off, but Adrian tells Vale that he is going to be back soon enough because he is not completely handing over the Night Slayer to Vale to kill. Vale unleashes his overwhelming aura as he prepares to take on the Night Slayer, while urging Adrian not to take too long because he might have just killed the Night Slayer before he returns. Seeing how effectively Vale is handling the Night Slayer, Adrian starts believing the rumors that say a quad-chain knight is on par with a swordmaster. It is just as it was said that a swordsman who has reached sword unity will have his will follow the path of his sword while his mana follows where his will goes. However, the Night Slayer is the wrong person for this because he can sniff out will with ridiculous precision. With this in mind, Adrian rushes into the castle because he knows he has to hurry up. Basically, Adrian has prepared a more fitting opponent for the Night Slayer, and this is someone whose body moves before their mind. This person is a type of swordsman whose will cannot be read, and this person is none other than Adelia. Adrian walks up to her, telling her that it is her time to join the battle, but Adelia is holed up in a corner with fear written all over her. Adrian then shows her the cloth stained with the Night Slayer's blood, telling her that the one who shed the blood is her opponent. The moment she sees the blood, something in her turns off, and her shaky body immediately becomes rigid. She gets on her feet and grabs her sword as an aura bursts out of her body, shocking even Adrian himself. Adrian realizes that Adelia's traits, the War Maniac and Butcher, are pretty terrifying. Adrian is more surprised that the traits are blooming all at once. Meanwhile, Vale is still fighting it out with the Night Slayer, and he soon realizes that the Night Slayer is perfectly reading his sword's path. Vale finally gets to understand the power of the open eye that Adrian was talking about. Vale is about to start struggling when a massive force shatters the wall behind him, and he turns back in shock to check what it is. The dust clears off, and Adelia appears in a new form. Without hesitation, she dashes toward the orc and swings wildly at the Night Slayer, pushing him back. Vale is left in complete shock because he knows Adelia to be Adrian's maid. Vale is, in fact, terrified because Adelia is totally different from the usual gentle girl that he knows. The Night Slayer expresses his discontent yet again, saying they have no honor to have launched a surprise attack on him, but Adelia shuts him up by delivering an attack that lets him know that he would die if he is not careful. Vale is utterly confused, and he asks Adrian what is currently happening, and Adrian replies that they are witnessing a berserker in action. What they are currently watching is a monster that would not even yield to a swordmaster. The reason why Adelia, who is not even up to sword expert yet, is able to face the Night Slayer is due to the traits that she possesses. The Butcher trait simply pushes her to slice and chop whatever comes into her line of sight, and there is basically no intent or path behind these actions. The same thing also goes for the War Maniac trait. Adelia continues standing her ground against the Night Slayer, but the monster believes that Adelia still doesn't pose a threat to him. He boasts about how Adelia cannot reach him no matter how many times she swings, but unknown to him, the open eye that he solely relies on is completely useless against Adelia. Before long, the Night Slayer starts to understand this as he gets cut on the arm, and he realizes that Adelia is just swinging a sword without evading or blocking his attacks. This leaves him wondering what sort of monster he is going up against, but Adelia doesn't really care because all she sees is an opponent that she needs to cut down. Adrian smiles when he hears the Night Slayer call Adelia a monster, and he considers this a compliment to Adelia. Just then, Adrian tells Vale that it is time for them to join forces with Adelia, since they have had enough time to rest. The two then dash toward the Night Slayer in an attempt to combine their strength to overwhelm him. This only gets the Night Slayer angrier, and he unleashes a crazy amount of fighting spirit that packs enough force to send Adelia backwards. Adrian is able to catch her to prevent her from hitting her head. Vale watches in shock, asking Adrian what the Night Slayer is trying to do. Adrian immediately figures out that the Night Slayer is basically taking back the fighting spirit that he had distributed, as he plans to use everything he has to take Adrian out, even if it is the last thing he does. Vale and Adelia take up the front attack, while Adrian stands back in preparation to unleash his full power. Adrian begins reciting a hymn, but before he can complete it, the Orc King releases his fighting spirit deep from within the mountain to interfere with what Adrian is doing, ultimately pushing Adrian to his knees. Vale notices that Adrian is struggling, and he takes it upon himself to do the needful to recite the hymn that Adrian was trying to. Surprisingly, his mana chain starts to resonate with the hymn to unleash an overwhelming aura that, in turn, shares a bond with Adrian's mana heart. Adrian is surprised when he sees this, and before he knows it, the mana starts resonating with every knight present in the castle, while dumping the energy into Adrian. It soon forms a connective bridge of mana down to Adrian's heart as the knights join Vale in reciting the hymn. Hearing how loud and rhythmic the hymn is, he concludes that it is more or less a war chant and not a song. Adrian admits that the emotions contained within the hymn are in no way inferior to a martial hymn. The mana he is getting from the others is enough to power his heart, and Adrian immediately uses the avenue to create a new hymn, which is the first war hymn to be created. An overwhelming amount of mana consumes Adrian, and he finally looks into the Night Slayer's eyes with confidence. The Night Slayer lunges at him, but this turns out to be his mistake as Adrian cuts through him like a hot knife cutting through butter. The Night Slayer is ultimately defeated, and a new hymn is born from the battle, which Adrian considers a befitting one for the Winter Castle. With the Night Slayer out of the equation, the knights shout for joy, celebrating the orc's death. However, their celebration is immediately brought to a halt when they realize that the gate is about to give way. Before they know it, an orc smashes through the gate, giving his comrades full access to the castle. However, Adrian is not worried as he wears an evil smile on his face because of what he plans to do to the annoying orcs. Adrian asks Vale if there is anyone who needs a break, but Vale lets him know that they are already in it. Even Adelia, who appears to be already tired, immediately gets back into berserker mode. Vale then tells Adrian to give the signal, and Adrian calmly orders all the forces to charge at the orcs. As the knights rush into the orcs, they continue reciting the hymn, while cutting down the enemies like paper. The orcs stand no chance whatsoever against the re-energized knights, who are out for blood, and in no time they have wiped out all the orcs inside and on the wall. Vincent, who is on the wall, is one of the intelligent ones to figure out that they are able to put up that much of a fight because of the strange heartbeat that is pushing them ahead. Vincent can still feel the energy in him, and he tells his men that only a handful will remain on the wall because they are heading out to take on the orcs. He screams at the top of his voice while ordering everyone to follow Adrian's lead. The narrator then decides to glaze Adrian as he narrates that Adrian was just a boy who had yet to undergo his coming of age, and his current battle is only his third. He is nothing but a greenhorn who has merely been tested, but for some reason, all chose to follow him as he marched ahead. From the knights he had chosen to Vale, to the seasoned captain of the Rangers, and even the fierce and unyielding knights of the north have all surrendered themselves to the wild, pounding rhythm of a heart that did not feel like their own. By the time everyone finally came to their senses, what was left was nothing but orc corpses scattered everywhere on the battlefield, and they had become victorious in the end. Adrian proceeds to grab the orc flag to declare their victory, and the knights yell in accordance while praising Adrian and praying for him to live long. Even Vincent is left in complete shock as he never expected that they would be able to annihilate the orcs so easily. Suddenly, some of them start crashing down in exhaustion, but they are not worried, since they all knew that they were pushing themselves too hard. Vale is forced to admit that the power of the martial hymn is nothing but incredible. Adrian then corrects him, telling him that what he just witnessed is not a martial hymn, but a war hymn. The moment he finishes saying this, Adrian also passes out cold. Vale freaks out when he sees the boy crashing to the ground, but he heaves a sigh of relief when he finally realizes that he is just asleep. Vale then orders his men to move Adrian to the barracks. He also orders that they gather and burn the fallen with respect. However, they have another plan for the Night Slayer. Meanwhile, Sigrun just witnessed everything that happened, and she is fascinated by the fact that Adrian just created a war hymn. She admits that Adrian always finds a way to surprise her, and because of this, she decides to grant him something nice. She emanates so much power from her body to restrict the Orc King's advance, and this is because she wants Adrian to have more time to grow. Later on in the capital, the king receives envoys from the Winter Castle, who explain to the king and the nobles present that not long ago, an elite force the size of 2 orc squads appeared at the castle. They reveal that the castle was able to come out on top, but since then, the castle has been preparing for the next battle. However, all of Balarhard's forces are nothing compared to the number of orcs that are coming for them. They let the higher-ups know that Vale has come to the sad conclusion that defending the castle is pretty impossible. Bielefeld is the first to speak up, and he commends the Rangers for their great work. However, the other nobles don't think sending reinforcements just because Vale asked for them is the right thing to do. Another trash noble mentions that the Balarhards have been defending the walls for over 100 years, so they want to believe that the report is just an exaggeration. One of the envoys mentioned that he is pretty sure that it is a difficult story to believe, and this is why they have brought evidence. They open a large box that they brought with them, and the nobles are stunned when they see the contents of the box, which turns out to be the giant head of the Night Slayer. The envoys inform them that the head they are looking at is from the last battle, revealing that it was Adrian who struck down the Night Slayer. The envoys mention that the Night Slayer is twice as large as an orc warrior. However, according to Adrian, there is still one that is at least 3 times larger than the Night Slayer, and this is the king of the orcs. Even though the envoys are explaining this the best way they can, the trash nobles are just not interested. The envoys mention that the orcs have about 16,000 warriors to boot, and with this, they urge the king to take the matter very seriously. One of the nobles then expresses his concern about the fact that Adrian was able to strike down such a powerful foe when it hadn't even been up to a year since he picked up the sword. The dude claims that the Balorhardes are probably lying in an attempt to gain political influence, but Bielefeld cuts in, yelling at the dude to watch his mouth. He tells him never to insult the dedication of Balorhard, who has silently defended the north of the kingdom. He asks him if he thinks Vale is someone who will cook up lies. Realizing that the room is about to turn into something else, the king steps in, telling them to keep quiet. The king lets the nobles know that Vale is not someone who will start saying trash, and if Vale says it is a matter of urgency, then it is definitely a matter of urgency. The king then declares that the families adjacent to the north are to provide maximum military forces and supplies for Balorhard. He continues further by saying the palace count is ordered to contract suitable mercenary groups to be dispatched to the north. The families given the order humbly acknowledge this, and the king further orders that the children of noble families that the first prince captured should be dispatched to the battlefield as well, so that they may wash away their sins by serving in the ranks as commoners. The envoys are surprised that even with the gravity of the issue, the king is not willing to dispatch the central army. Even Bielefeld is pissed that the warriors who are sacrificing everything they have are not being awarded the respect that they deserve. The meeting is about to be concluded when the second prince enters the room, gaining everyone's attention. He mentions that the Balorhard family has shown so much dedication over the years, and because of this, he doesn't think it is right for the royal family to turn a blind eye. The second prince, Maximilian, then makes the declaration to take the knights and go to the north to defend it, leaving the trash nobles utterly speechless. After the cabinet meeting, the king privately tells Max to stop by Ellen County on his way to the Winter Castle. The king reveals that he has disguised the Iron Lions and a portion of the Central Army as mercenaries to serve as reinforcement for the north. All Max has to do is lead them there. The king sternly warns Max that Balorhard must never fall, as the kingdom's survival depends on that fortress. Max assures his father that he'll carry out the mission without fail. However, he's confused as to why the king acted indifferent in front of the nobles when he was asked to send reinforcements. Since he was planning to deploy the Iron Lions and the Central Army, Max feels he could have just said it during the meeting. The king explains that he had to be cautious and couldn't just agree out in the open. Gathering the kingdom's forces and sending them to Balorhard might alert the empire and make them think that the royal family has intentions of rebelling. The empire is already wary of the kingdom, and sending the army would make them suspect that the king is raising forces in collusion with House Balorhard. This would just give them the perfect excuse to find fault with the House of Leonberg. The king warns Max that they have to be extremely cautious not to give the empire anything to use against the kingdom. He then pats Max on the shoulder as he calls him fondly, sternly advising him to keep walking the righteous path. He says it's the only way for the allies who still serve the Leonberg name to gather beside Max, and for that to happen, Balorhard must never fall. Max firmly assures his father that he will definitely protect the north. However, the king warns him that it won't be easy because the Count of Balorhard, Vale, has already become Adrian's supporter, and because of this, the north might just already be enemy territory. Max is surprised to hear this as he points out that Adrian is already there, and since he's a member of the royal family, there should be no problem. The king is infuriated to hear this and reminds Max of all the harm and chaos Adrian has brought to the kingdom in the past. The king wears such a disdainful look as he talks about how Adrian sold the kingdom's future to the empire. However, Max feels Adrian can't be held accountable because he was too young at the time. Apparently, he was only 13 at the time of the incident. Despite Max's attempt to smooth things over, the king refuses to listen. The king then begins to tremble with a fearful look in his eyes as he recalls how Adrian sold out the powerful knights who were the backbone of the kingdom to the empire. Back then, the king could only watch helplessly as their swords were broken and they were forced to destroy their mana rings. The king could never forget that day, and it keeps haunting him like an endless nightmare every time he closes his eyes. His own son sold the future of the kingdom and stood beside the enemy, Marquis Montpellier of the empire. What even haunted him most was the smile on Adrian's face with no sign of remorse whatsoever. Even until now, every time he closed his eyes, he kept seeing that horrifying laughter on Adrian's face. Even after hearing all this, Max still tries to reason with the king regarding Adrian. He mentions that Adrian has repented for his past mistake and is fighting hard in the north to make up for it. Max also adds that he heard about Adrian's great achievements in battle. Unfortunately, no matter how Max tries to paint Adrian as a saint, the king refuses to budge. He believes that Adrian hasn't repented but simply forgotten about all his atrocities. The king angrily says that Adrian can never make up for the harm he caused to those loyal subjects no matter how hard he grinds in battle. This is because the one he harmed can never form mana rings again, and it would be disrespectful to tell them to use the mana heart. In this era of mana rings, those who use mana hearts are regarded as lowly mercenaries. The king firmly believes that 1,000 good Adrians can never replace the loyal subjects he harmed. After ranting, the king then orders Max to head to the north before Montpellier catches wind of their plan and interferes. Seeing that he can no longer reason with his father when it comes to Adrian, Max decides to obey his command. Shortly after, Max successfully led the troops disguised as mercenaries out of Ellen County. They hurried to the north because it was a race against time to provide help to the Balorhard army. Along the way, stragglers fell behind, but the troop remained determined, and without rest, they continued in their relentless march. They couldn't afford to stop, and Max's resolve kept them going. Among the reinforcement troops was Antoine, captain of the Silver Fox mercenaries. During the journey, Antoine praised Max for being incredibly determined. Even though Max grew up in comfort and his body isn't as tough as those of mercenaries or soldiers, he kept braving the harsh conditions without wavering. The vice commander of the Iron Lion Knights, Erhim Killinger, worries about Max and checks up on him. But Max assures Killinger that he's alright. Since they are pressed for time, he doesn't want to stop to rest. Killinger then notices that the snow is getting heavier, which means they might be close to their destination. Just then, they notice a couple of refugees heading their way, and Killinger asks a subordinate to check them out and find out what's going on. The dude then asks the people if they're coming from Balorhard. They reply that they are and explain that Vale issued an emergency evacuation notice, telling them to prepare for the worst. The dude asks them about the situation at the fortress, but they let him know that they have no idea what's happening. Apparently, they packed up and left after the soldiers told them to leave. Max is uneasy when he hears that they were told to prepare for the worst. He wonders if the situation at the front is so bad that Vale is considering the possibility that the Winter Castle might fall. After interrogating the refugees, Max orders the troops to make haste. But as they head deeper into the mountain, the snow gets heavier, and they are soon hit by a blizzard. Just then, they overhear voices chanting a hymn. As the voices get closer, it turns out to be soldiers carrying the Balorhard flag. They march forward, boldly chanting the same hymn Adrian composed during the battle against the orcs. A few moments later, the commander signals for his men to halt in front of Max and his troops. He then introduces his unit as the 3rd Legion and identifies himself as Jordan of the Balorhard Ranger Squad, 17th Platoon. Recognizing Max as the 2nd Prince, Jordan exchanges formal greetings with him before explaining that his men have just returned from a patrol. He then offers to escort them to the Winter Castle, and noting the worsening weather, Jordan advises the group to leave their wagons behind to avoid delays. Shortly afterward, Jordan's soldiers resume their march, forming ranks on both sides of Max's troops while continuing to chant their hymn. Killinger is puzzled by how organized the soldiers are because he heard that the men of the north are rough and temperamental. Max then asks Jordan about the chant, and Jordan explains that it's the military chant of the 3rd Legion known as the Hymn of Winter. He adds that they're happy to sing the hymn Nonstop while marching because it somehow makes them feel warmer. Max is surprised when he learns that his brother, the 1st Prince, composed the hymn. Jordan says Adrian composed the beginning, while the soldiers just added the remaining lyrics at the end. He then goes on to happily narrate how the blizzard was so heavy when Adrian first arrived and how he carried a soldier on his back for a whole day. All this talk about his brother leaves Max wondering what type of potion Adrian fed these people. He can't help but notice how they affectionately mention his name in every conversation. A few minutes later, the blizzard suddenly disappears as they arrive outside the fortress. Jordan explains that this always strangely happens the moment they reach outside the castle. Like clockwork, he mentions that Adrian even complained about it because it happened the day he first arrived at the gate. Jordan leads the group to the gate and pushes it open as he welcomes them to the kingdom's northern frontline fortress. The moment the gates open, the faces of Max and his group twist in disgust as they are met with a path strewn with blood and corpses. The famous Winter Castle was nothing like they envisioned. The walls looked hastily patched, and orc corpses were scattered around the ground, showing traces of a fierce battle. Max is horrified as he stares at the gory sight in front of him, and just then, Adrian steps out to meet them. He casually scolds Jordan for slacking off in front of the gate. Adrian and his guys had just returned from patrol, but from the blood on his armor, Jordan points out that Adrian must have encountered some trouble. Adrian explains that they ran into an annoying pest on the way. Jordan then teases him, saying he must have had a field day tearing the pests apart. Adrian brushes him off and turns his attention to the new guys. He figures that they're the reinforcement and doesn't even recognize his own brother. Jordan is confused as he glances at Max and Adrian, who seem not to recognize each other. Frustrated, Jordan introduces them to each other, wondering if they've never met before. Adrian closely observes Max and realizes that he's the spitting image of his old friend, Leon Burke. Shortly afterwards, Adrian leads the group into the castle, and after scanning the place, Max notes that a battle must have occurred there. Adrian replies that there was one 3 days ago and says Max will get used to it after a while. Max is confused to hear this, as he wonders how many battles they have to fight for it to become a common thing. He's even more curious about how they can be so calm with so many corpses just casually lying around. As if sensing what Max is thinking about, Jordan tells him that the orc corpses will soon seem like a flower garden after he encounters a horde of live ones. Jordan was only trying to comfort them, but his words only made them feel even more uneasy. A few minutes later, Vale and a couple of soldiers meet up with them to welcome Max. Vale then pays his respects to the second prince, who also humbly does the same as he sings Vale's praise for being the kingdom's shield. Jordan then blows a horn, and every single soldier stationed in the castle pays their respect to Max, welcoming him to Balorhard. Moved by their loyalty, Max waves the Leonberg flag as he enthusiastically expresses his gratitude to the soldiers for their sacrifice and dedication to the kingdom. But the whole ceremonial blunder doesn't move the soldiers. To them, Max's salute just sounds like some cringy jargon, and the moment he finishes, Vale immediately invites them inside. Later during dinner, Max can't take his eyes off Adrian, whom he hasn't seen for a while. But even though Adrian has changed so much beyond recognition, Max is relieved that he looks so healthy. An awkward silence fills the room as each side warily stares at the other. Adrian is curious when he catches Max staring at him so intensely, but before he can find out why, Max beats him to it, asking if Adrian has something to say. Adrian brushes him off, and Max cheerfully asks him about his stay at the Winter Castle compared to the palace. As if someone just asked about his favorite hobbies, Adrian happily says he's absolutely stoked about his stay in the castle. He explains that it is because of the frequent battles and the tons of monsters that he gets to tear apart every day. Max finds Adrian's answer ridiculous, especially because he's making the constant battles seem like a good thing. Adrian then passes more food to Max, telling him to eat as much as he can, or he might regret it later. But Max, not wanting the others to feel uncomfortable, tells Adrian that he's fine. Max's rejection leaves Adrian frustrated as he notes that Max's stubborn personality is the same as his ancestor Leon Burke. Seeing how Adrian is paying attention to Max, Vale points out that he's acting unusually. He's not used to Adrian looking out and caring for others as he did for Max. Afterwards, Max asks them to brief him about the real situation of the Winter Castle. He explains that after observing the fortress and seeing so many corpses, it seemed there were almost 1,000 of them scattered around the castle. Vale tells him that it's because monsters have been attacking the castle on every 4th day. Their numbers vary each time they attack, but they've never been below 500. Killinger points out that the orcs must have depleted most of their forces with such frequent attacks, but Adrian lets him know that the battle has not affected the number of orcs, but instead, they've even increased. He adds that the enemy is growing steadily even as they speak. Vincent then says that they've been monitoring the orc hordes daily and have confirmed about 9 banners so far. Max and his men are stunned when Vincent shockingly reveals that the orcs still have a force of at least 18,000. After dinner, Max and Killinger express that the situation in the north is far more serious than they anticipated. But despite how dire things seem, Max notices that everyone at the castle looks too chill. Killinger also points out that Adrian seems to be getting along with everyone at the castle better than expected. However, Max can't relate because he was never close to Adrian in the past. He can't help but notice that the Adrian he's seeing now is very different from the one in the rumors. Killinger then narrates how Adrian visited them at the Iron Lion Castle and dueled with several members without losing a single match. He points out that Adrian's skills seem to have improved since the last time he came to Iron Lion Castle. Max is surprised to hear about Adrian's visit and wonders why no one talked about it. Killinger explains that Adrian made everyone keep the events that occurred there under tight wraps. Max then ponders on everything he heard and can't help but wonder how Adrian became talented overnight. He believes that talent can be hidden, but Adrian never had any talent to begin with, so it makes no sense for him to suddenly create what he does not have out of nowhere. As he continues to observe him, Max can't help but wonder what Adrian is hiding. The following day, they gather for another meeting, during which Adrian tells them everything he knows about the King of Orcs. However, Killinger and Antoine question whether the King of Orcs truly exists. They argue that the so-called king might simply be a larger and more cunning orc. Since no one has ever seen its true form, the entire story sounds like nothing more than a made-up boogeyman. To address their doubts, Adrian asks them to look outside at the giant spear that flew all the way from the mountains. As they turn their attention to it, he explains that the spear belongs to the King of Orcs. Considering the distance between the castle and the deep mountains, Antoine finds it impossible to believe that an ordinary orc could throw something so massive that far. He suggests that a siege weapon might have been used to launch it instead. Adrian then asks them to decide whether a brainless monster somehow operated a siege weapon capable of firing such a projectile over that distance. or whether a creature powerful enough to wield a spear designed for a siege weapon simply hurled it all the way from the mountains. Since they're still struggling to believe him, Adrian tells Max and his men to go back to the capital because what the North needs is reinforcements to help them fight, and not Sherlock Holmes. Killinger immediately apologizes for being an annoying doubting Thomas, explaining that he was only trying to confirm the facts. After he apologizes, Vale tells everyone to take a break and resume in an hour. As the group disperses, Max stays back for a private conversation with Adrian. Max wants to know how Adrian knew about the changes in the orcs and the existence of the King of Orcs. Adrian explains that it's because he has been interested in old tales for a long time. Max then asks if he read about it in some ancient text, and this idea sounds like a good excuse for Adrian. Even though he just made that up on the spot, Adrian feels it's good enough to fool anyone, since the original was obsessed with the founding king's legendary sword. Besides, after he stabbed himself, he started practicing the outdated Monahart. Therefore, all these are enough to make people believe he's just an idiot obsessed with the legends. Putting aside that thought for now, Adrian carefully observes Max and finally understands why the king dotes on Max but hates the eldest prince. From his observation, Max is just and kind with a gentle yet unyielding, strong character. He even has the potential to be called a peerless genius. While Leonberg had the qualities to become an iron-blooded monarch, Max possesses the qualities of a wise king. However, with a dangerous era approaching, wisdom alone cannot overcome it. Now that the King of Orcs and the evil elves have revealed themselves, Adrian senses that a chaotic era is about to begin, and the monarch who can navigate this era of chaos must know how to turn cowardly sheep into lions and slaughter the pack of wolves. Adrian knows that he is the only one fit to play such a ruthless role because, as a sword, he was an observer who had watched over countless wars and chaotic eras. And he was also the one who was wielded as the ender of those same endless wars and chaotic eras. The following day, as the troops prepare for battle, Adrian takes charge, assigning them to their positions. He orders the Silver Fox mercenaries to be on standby as reserve troops while the others are divided into 3 groups and assigned to defend the wall with the 3rd Legion. Though they obey Adrian's orders, some of them look quite displeased about the arrangement. Adrian senses their displeasure, but he doesn't give a damn about them. He already knew they would have complaints since he basically tore apart the forces and merged them into the Balorhard army. This could be seen as ignoring the chain of command, but Adrian has no plans to entrust the wall to those who have no experience fighting monsters. Vincent is worried the division might cause trouble, but Adrian tells him that everything will be fine. He assures Vincent that no one would remember petty political conflicts once the real battle begins. After assigning positions, Adrian scolds Vale for dumping his duty as commander on him. Vale explains that it's for Adrian's good, and thanks to it, Adrian's position in Balorhard has been solidified. Believing that Vale is just making up excuses, Adrian points out that Vale has also been dumping all the paperwork on Vincent. Vale admits that it's because he's busy forging his purpose. He followed one path all his life and thought there was no way forward. However, ever since he started hanging out with Adrian, another path suddenly appeared. Vale admits that he has grown ambitious because of this new path. However, it's not as a commander, but as a knight. He then confidently declares that he will fight the warlord to prove himself. Adrian reminds him that he couldn't even defeat a mere Night Slayer, let alone the warlord. Vale then confesses that it is exactly because of that failure that he has grown ambitious. Thanks to everything that he has been experiencing, Vale was able to find a new path, and now he has realized what to do in his later years. Vale's sudden emotional rant almost makes Vincent and Adrian gag. They quickly hurry off, wondering if the old guy might be going through a midlife crisis. Suddenly a horn blares in the distance, signaling that trouble is heading their way. Everyone holds their breath, knowing that the long-awaited battle is approaching. Adrian yells for Vincent to mind the walls, and Vincent reassures him that there are no issues since they always stay combat-ready at all times. Meanwhile, Max watches cluelessly as Adrian and Vincent hurry off to their positions. But Adrian's voice asking why he is not moving brings Max back to reality. Outside the castle, a horde of orcs gathers, waving their crude flag, and as they approach the winter castle, the lookout guard alerts everyone to the impending enemy. In no time, a fierce battle begins as the orcs try to scale the walls, but huge stones rain down on them, pushing them off the wall. Adrian is seen on the other side of the wall, dishing out orders to the knights on how to push back the orcs from the wall. While Adrian is giving them orders and boosting their morale, Max stands in a corner staring at him. Adrian instructs the knights to use everything available to keep the orcs disoriented. Some of the soldiers use spears while the others shoot flaming arrows, wreaking havoc on the orcs. At the same time, Max watches the whole chaotic scene and can't believe that the Winter Castle has been fighting such a terrifying battle every single day before his arrival. Max is so distracted, he doesn't see the giant axe coming for his head. Fortunately, Adrian pulls him out of harm's way, telling him not to space out on the wall. Once he's safe, Adrian lets him know that anyone wearing flashy clothes on the wall becomes the primary target of the orcs. After regaining his composure, Max thanks Adrian for saving him. But Adrian explains that he did it because if Max dies, the orcs' morale will rise, and that will make things bad for the castle troops. After digesting Adrian's words, Max decides to fight instead of just being an NPC. He then orders Killinger to provide support, but Adrian stops him. He explains that the wall is too narrow and that too many people will mess up their movements. To prevent that from happening, Max orders the soldiers to remain on standby while the knights join the battle. Adrian is surprised that Max came with the Iron Lion Knights instead of mercenaries. And among them are Dale and Dunham, two of the guys Adrian defeated at the Iron Lion Castle. Since it's been a while since they last saw each other, the boys exchange greetings with Adrian as they charge into battle beside him. While taking down a couple of orcs, Dunham also exchanges greetings with Arwen before immediately heading off to continue fighting. Arwen is taken aback to see him since they never expected the king to send proper reinforcements. Adrian had long since known that a few knights were mixed in with the mercenaries. However, he wasn't expecting them to be this many. He's relieved that there are quite a number of them and decides to leave that position for them to handle. As the battle continues, Killinger and Dunham dominate the battlefield, but after fighting for a while, they begin to run out of steam. Max is worried that the orcs seem to be increasing, no matter how many they eliminate. He wonders how many more are yet to be taken out, and Killinger estimates that there are about 1,000 of them. Max then notices that the castle forces on the wall seem to have decreased. After quickly scanning their surroundings, he realizes that the Knights of Winter Castle are missing. Just then, he looks over the wall to see them gathered in front of the gate with Adrian leading them. Max wonders whether they plan to open the gates to face the orc hordes waiting outside. Just as he thought, Adrian orders the gate to be opened, and the moment it is opened, a ton of orcs charge in, growling. Adrian remains calm as he begins to chant the Hymn of Winter. Max recalls that it's the same hymn that the 3rd Legion was chanting when he ran into them on his first day at the castle. Meanwhile, Adrian continues to chant, and everyone joins him as mana flows from his mana heart, resonating with their mana rings. Dale and his Iron Lion Knights, who are not used to the bizarre phenomenon, are spooked. Tagging the mana surge as suspicious, Killinger tells Max to circulate his energy and protect himself from the weird mana surge, but Max is too engrossed watching how Adrian and the Knights of Winter Castle effortlessly tear through the horde of orcs. The nobles in the capital had claimed that Adrian was just in the north stealing Vale's achievements. They swore there was no way he could defeat a puny goblin, let alone an orc, since he's an incompetent, tyrannical scoundrel. But the fearless and ruthless Adrian that Max sees now is completely different from the one they termed useless. Watching him now, Max struggles to figure out which part of the rumors from back then was true and how much of it was just made-up lies. However, one thing was certain for Max, and it was the fact that he was witnessing something incredibly unbelievable on the battlefield. Hyped up by the scene before him, Max wants to go down to join Adrian and his knights, but Killinger lets him know that it's impossible because his own team is completely out of juice. Killinger says it's reckless for them to go down when the soldiers are so exhausted. Seeing how wiped out they look, Max can't help but question why his side of the camp looks mid. He wonders why Adrian is different, even though there's not much difference in their levels. Meanwhile, Adrian and his men have completely annihilated the orcs, and as usual, Adrian picks up the orc banner. With a proud smile, he raises it into the air, shouting for victory. Antoine is awestruck as he quietly observes Adrian, wondering how someone who possesses a mana heart can be so majestic. His thought is interrupted by a knight informing him that Adrian wants to see him privately later. Antoine agrees to the meeting as he continues to muse over Adrian and how he's so different from the rumors. Antoine had heard that Adrian was inferior to Max, but seeing them now, the rumors were definitely wrong. While everyone else is amazed by him, Adrian is only concerned with showing off his banner and competing with Vincent. He boasts that he now has 19 banners, but he learns that Vincent has 26. Adrian argues that he has more because a Legion banner should count for at least 10 unit banners. After calculating, Adrian proudly announces that he has 28, which is more than Vincent's 26. But by that logic, Vincent argues that he should have 35. Adrian is not too happy to hear this, but one soldier tells him to stop showing off. He explains that Vincent's banners have been collected over several years, while Adrian is trying to surpass him in just a few months. However, Adrian is quite competitive and refuses to accept defeat, so he tells them to get lost. As Adrian continues to make jokes with the soldiers, Max watches them quietly from a distance. He can't believe how easy it is for an actual royal to casually exchange silly banter with lowly soldiers. Though the whole scene seems strange, Max can't help but feel like it isn't so bad. Max could see that even though Adrian was treating the soldiers and knights so freely, their eyes were still filled with respect. After the playful banter with the soldiers, Adrian puts them on cleanup duty. Though they complain playfully, none of them disobeys him as they scurry off to do their duty. Observing the looks in their eyes, Max notes that they seem to revere Adrian. Just then, Killinger and some of the Iron Lion Knights arrive to check on Max, and they praise him for his bravery during the battle. Apparently, this was his first ever battle, but as the Knights continue to butter him up, Max comes to a realization. He realizes that the way Killinger and the others look at him is because they are proud of him. This is the same way people in the capital used to stare at him. Basically, their admiration towards him was nothing more than praise for a child who just performed a small feat. This realization makes Max embarrassed because all this time he thought it was something better, like how everyone in the Winter Castle sees Adrian as a proper man. Dunham soon interrupts Max, asking for permission to greet Adrian. Without hesitation, Max tells him to go ahead, and after thanking him, Dunham and the others excitedly rush over to Adrian's side. They immediately begin to praise him in a way that is different from how they praised Max. While watching their exchange, Max asks Killinger whether Dunham and the others actually volunteered to join this mission. Killinger replies that they did, despite knowing how perilous the journey to the north would be. The proud Iron Lion Knights hid their identities and traveled north as lowly mercenaries, embarking on a mission with no guarantee of survival. Yet they volunteered without hesitation, and watching their interactions with Adrian, Max finally understands they did it for Adrian simply because they respect him. Killinger tells Max not to be too jealous, but Max assures him he is only surprised because it's unexpected. While the people in the capital enjoyed peaceful lives, a great war was raging in the north. The orcs, once dismissed as insignificant, have built a kingdom of their own. Yet the most surprising development is that Adrian, once considered useless, has taken root amid the chaos and is steadily growing into a powerful force. And while all of this is happening, no one in the capital knows about it or ever imagined it could happen. Later that night, Antoine goes to Adrian's tent for their meeting. Adrian asks whether he has a contract with the royal family, and Antoine reveals that he is currently bound to them under a long-term agreement. Adrian then asks about his plans once the contract ends, but Antoine explains that he has never given much thought to the future since, as a mercenary, he could lose his life at any moment. Hearing this, Adrian offers to make a contract with him instead. Antoine immediately rejects the proposal, saying he is not desperate for money. Adrian chuckles and explains that he is offering far more than money. Pointing to Antoine's chest, he remarks that the mana he has accumulated was built through crude methods. Adrian then promises to help him refine it properly. He claims that once the process is complete, no one will ever look down on Antoine again for relying on low-grade techniques. Basically, the mana heart practiced in this era is considered a lowly technique because it was developed through crude and inefficient methods. This flawed mana heart is cultivated using the heavy impact refinement method, resulting in a foundation built on impure mana. Any path forged through such energy is nothing more than a fragile sandcastle that could collapse at any moment. To prove his point, Adrian releases his mana flow, revealing what a true mana heart looks like. Compared to Antoine's crude mana heart, the difference is like heaven and earth. Yet despite Adrian's demonstration and explanation, Antoine remains unconvinced by words alone. Just as Adrian begins to think his offer will be rejected, Antoine unexpectedly accepts. He admits that the only reason he believes such an unbelievable claim is because it comes from Adrian himself. Antoine then pledges his loyalty, humbly asking Adrian to grant him a title. After witnessing Adrian's command of the battlefield that day, Antoine became convinced that he was unlike the other stubborn knights. Adrian informs Antoine that their contract will remain in effect until he ascends to the throne. He then asks whether Antoine knows how to utilize his mana heart, to which Antoine confidently replies that he does. Eager to demonstrate, Antoine draws both a long sword and a short sword. Seeing his confidence, Adrian's expectations rise. Antoine proudly declares that he is about to perform a technique known as the blade that cuts swords. With great fanfare, he swings the long sword at the short sword, intending to slice it cleanly in half, but the result is underwhelming. Not only does Antoine fail to cut through the smaller blade, but the whole thing leaves him completely exhausted. Watching the pitiful display, Adrian can only stare in confusion, wondering what exactly he just witnessed. Antoine quickly explains that the sword verse he demonstrated is one of the most popular techniques among mercenaries. According to him, obtaining it was no easy feat since he spent half a year begging a high-ranking mercenary to teach him and ultimately poured nearly his entire fortune into acquiring it. But despite the steep price, Antoine says he has no regrets because it has saved his life countless times on the battlefield. Adrian is completely flabbergasted by what he hears and immediately asks whether other mercenaries use similar sword verses. Antoine explains that while there are some differences between them, they are fundamentally the same. Rather than reassuring Adrian, the answer only irritates him further because these so-called sword verses are nothing more than crude imitations of true martial hymns. Martial hymns were traditionally passed down through generations of the same bloodline. This strict tradition existed to ensure that unqualified individuals could not tarnish or degrade the hymn's rank and integrity. Even members of the family were evaluated before being entrusted with it. Yet now, fragments of these sacred arts are being bought and sold for coin like common merchandise. Realizing just how much Antoine needs to unlearn and relearn, Adrian immediately decides to revise the terms of their agreement. Instead of lasting until he claims the throne, the contract will now extend for 20 years. Antoine is stunned by the announcement and immediately protests, arguing that 20 years is practically a lifetime commitment. Antoine points out that no mercenary company would ever agree to a contract lasting 20 years. However, Adrian knows that even a lifetime of service might not be enough to guide this man onto the proper path of the Mana Heart. Realizing that words alone will not convince him, Adrian decides to offer a glimpse of what Antoine has been missing all along. He begins to chant the Requiem of Souls as his sword moves in perfect harmony with the flow of mana. Antoine is awestruck as he watches Adrian's flawless movement. After the demonstration, Adrian sternly asks what Antoine thinks is the value of what he just showed him, since he spent half a year just to learn a snippet of a crude verse. At that very moment, Antoine realizes that he may just have wasted his whole life, and 20 years is nothing compared to what Adrian is offering. Adrian then tells him to think about it, but to intimidate him a little, he unleashes a fearsome aura, telling Antoine not to take too long to respond.